Good morning and welcome to everyone to the 2021 Harrison Innovation Symposium. We have over 200 participants signed up from all over the world who have gathered to honor Mike, make fun of Mike, celebrate with Mike through the morning's Pediatric Device Consortium pitch competition, and then to join world's leaders in fetal, pediatric, and device innovation in the afternoon sessions. We're very thankful to all of you for participating in what should be an inspiring and fun day, keeping in Mike's spirits. I'm truly honored to introduce Chancellor Sam Hawgood. Chancellor Hawgood started his career at UCSF as a neonatologist, quickly rising to division chief, where he worked with many of us and worked with Mike on several groundbreaking fetal and neonatal therapies. He is a world-renowned clinician, researcher, and educator. Sam became chair of the Department of Pediatrics and then dean of the School of Medicine, and then ultimately has led all of UCSF as chancellor. As chancellor, he has led UCSF's incredible growth, including the building of the new campus at Mission Bay and the planned building of the hospitals at Parnassus and Oakland. He has supported this through unprecedented collaborations with notable Bay Area philanthropists. He has also guided UCSF with a steady and reassuring leadership through the unprecedented pandemic in the last year. Welcome, Sam, and we look forward to you kicking off the Harrison Symposium.
Thank you so much, Hanmin, and it's a real privilege to be asked to provide a few welcoming comments on this third annual Michael Harrison Innovation Symposium. And it's a really special treat for me to do that, to recognize Mike's tremendous impact on the field of pediatric surgery, but I would say more broadly on the field of medicine throughout his remarkable career. It's also just so much fun to see so many familiar faces, friends from over the decades that I've worked with and learned from. But even more exciting to see so many new faces, the next generation of innovators who will move our field forward. I'm going to make a few personal remarks, but before I do, let me share just one quote that I think captures Mike Harrison's contributions to the field. It's from Charles Huggins. He was the Nobel laureate in medicine and physiology in 1966. He was recognized for his groundbreaking work in hormonal therapy for prostate cancer. And he said, and I quote, "Head, heart, and hand, the three H's of experimentation, all are involved in creativity in the medical sciences, and the combination of head, heart, and hand enables us to recognize a solvable problem." And that, to me, embodies Mike throughout his career. First of all, the two words, solvable problem. The ability to recognize a problem, but more importantly, to recognize when a problem was solvable. And that's what innovation really is all about. Not simply the act of discovery or invention, but actually moving a problem to become a solvable problem and then spreading that solution around the world. And of course, the three H's, head, heart, and hand. We all know just how important hands are to surgeons in particular, but the head and the heart, and I would emphasize the heart, a real passion to want to do better by their patients are what distinguishes the truly great innovators in medicine. And Mike, you embody the three H's like no one I have ever met. Just a quick personal story. Hanmin indicated that I have spent my entire career at UCSF, but I trained in medicine and did my residency training and fellowship training in Australia, where I studied neonatology in the late 1970s, and it's kind of lost in the decades of time now, but it's important to go back, at least for me, and recognize that the very first neonatal intensive care unit was only established in 1964, about a decade before I turned my attention to neonatology. And of course, it's relevant to today's symposium that very first neonatal intensive care unit in the world was established right here at the University of California, San Francisco in 1964. So in the late 1970s, neonatology just seemed like a garden of riches. Almost any issue needed a solution. There was just the opportunity to add new knowledge everywhere you looked. In Australia, I felt that I had received a world-class training in neonatology, but I was left unhappy in the sense that I didn't have a good understanding of where discovery came from. What was the process by which new knowledge was invented and then moved into clinical care? That was just not the current culture back then in the 1970s. So when I had completed my training, I looked around the world for where I could get an insight into how medical discovery came about, and more importantly, how that discovery was then moved into clinical care. And that landed me in San Francisco in truly a magical environment at the time. The great pioneers of neonatology were working here, and collaborations from cardiac surgery to cardiology to anesthesia, pediatric surgery, and many, many other disciplines were forging new ground every single day. Coming to work was just a blessing because we were surrounded by people who weren't comfortable with the status quo, weren't comfortable with the kind of care we were able to deliver at that time, and were always looking for how we could advance the field. Every single patient we took care of was an opportunity to discover something and do better. And there was no one, absolutely no one, who epitomized that drive and culture than Mike Harrison. I can remember in the intensive care nursery, whether it was day or night, and Mike would come in and you just feel like there was an energy that came with him, a sense that there was no time, and it wasn't because he was rushed or that he was busy, although I'm sure both of those things were true. It was almost like there was this tremendous pressure of excitement and pressure of thought as to how we could do better with every single patient. And it's absolutely no surprise whatsoever for me that almost 4 decades later, Mike is actually on the symposium agenda today, talking about magnets in pediatric surgery. And Mike, I can remember the first time you instilled a magnet in a patient with esophageal atresia that I was taking care of with you. And it was both exciting and frankly quite frightening. But it's wonderful to see that you continue to push the boundaries. So I personally thank you for introducing me to the concept of innovation early in my career. It stuck with me. It's what makes me most excited to continue to be here at the University of California, San Francisco. And I see that you've attracted a global audience and global participants in this symposium. And it's so exciting to know that people around the world are just continuing your legacy of innovation, discovery, and most importantly, the heart in medical innovation. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Hanmin, for the introduction. And again, so wonderful to see familiar faces. And I wish you the very, very best in the symposium today. I started with a quote, so I'll end with a quote, which is got a slightly different flavor, but I think equally pertinent to today's symposium. This one is from Thomas Edison. You all know who he was, one of the great inventors ever. And he has said, "I have not failed 10,000 times. I have successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work." And again, for me, that just says we keep going. New ideas don't always work, but if we persist and persist 10,000 times, we'll make a major breakthrough and make life better for the patients and families that we serve. So congratulations on the symposium, and Hanmin, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Sam. And I'm going to thank Sam for your inspiring remarks. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Shuvo Roy. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanmin. And thank you, Chancellor. That was very inspiring. and a nice reflection on what Dr. Harrison has done for UCSF and for the neonatal and pediatric fields and the whole world. So welcome to the Michael Harrison Symposium and the PDC Accelerator pitch competition. And I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of the UCSF Stanford Pediatric Device Consortium. Let me start off by saying that, the UCSF Pediatric Device Consortium has been around just over 10 years or so. In 2009, we received one of the 3 inaugural awards from the FDA to establish one of the pediatric device consortia around the country. And what we actually built on was a legacy that the others here may be familiar with, at least some of you, which is this open innovation forum that Dr. Harrison pioneered with colleagues like Dr. Hawgood and Hanmin decades ago. So that has become our trademark weekly forum. Every Tuesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, we meet, and it's open to the community, and we can talk about unmet needs or clinical challenges that have to be addressed, technology solution, and also translational challenges that must be addressed to move ideas towards the patient. And since our founding, we have assisted over 100 projects that have gone from very early stage concepts to some that have gone to patients, including 10 projects that have come from our internal community. And we've attracted close to $40 million in external funding. I'm also pleased to say that in 2018, we partnered up with our colleagues at Stanford University to become the UCSF Stanford Pediatric Device Consortium, and where we have brought in the elements of Stanford Biodesign through our colleague, James Wall. And we work very much hand in hand. And today, with the 2 hospitals, as well as the other network of hospitals in the Bay Area, we are encouraging innovation locally as well as through partners. Let me again thank you for joining us, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Usha Thekkedath. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, for the great overview of our PDC. On behalf of the UCSF Stanford Pediatric Device Consortium and the Harrison Innovation Symposium organizers, it's my pleasure to welcome you all again to the 3rd annual PDC pitch competition. We have 11 teams selected from an annual pool of applicants pitching their pediatric innovations to you today. The teams, in the order they're presenting are Reos, Better Sleep Designs, Osteo, Otis Valve Technologies, Limbix Health, Baby Steps Orthopedics, Mica Labs and UCSF Surgical Innovations, Stanford University, Octus Surgical, Starlight Cardiovascular, and Novonate. Congratulations to all pitch finalists to reaching to this level. And thank you for your commitment to our pediatric patients and their unmet clinical needs. The PDC is planning to award a total of $400,000 to pitch winners today, including a $100,000 Platinum Award, a $75,000 Gold Award, several $50,000 Silver Awards, and $25,000 each Bronze Awards. These awards are sponsored in part by FDA's Office of Orphan Product Development through a consortia grant awarded to our PDC. A generous donation in matching funds from Cottrell Foundation and the UCSF Benioff Hospitals. A big thank you to all our sponsors. Today's pitch will be judged by a team of experts with extensive experience in device development and commercialization. Our pitch judges today are Mr. Avi Roop, a partner at RCT Venture Fund, Dr. Bonvin Harris, a pediatric cardiologist, innovator, and founder of Duo Apple Health, Dr. Diana Farmer, Professor of Pediatric Surgery and Surgeon-in-Chief of University of California, Davis Children's Hospital. Dr. George Titmarsh, a neonatologist, CEO of La Jolla Therapeutics, and a board member of Packard Foundation. Mr. Michael Billig, co-founder and CEO of Experian Group, a regulatory, quality, and clinical consulting firm. Dr. Pierre Theodore, VP of Scientific Innovation of Johnson & Johnson, and therapeutic area expert of thoracic surgical oncology for J&J Group of medical device companies. Mr. Rick Idemoto, Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer of Stanford Children's Health. Dr. Robert Grubbs, Professor of Chemistry and Chemical Engineering at California Institute of Technology and a Nobel laureate for chemistry in 2005. Ms. Stephanie Morris, Managing Director of Entrepreneurship at University of California, San Francisco. A warm welcome to all our judges, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise in helping us select our winners today. So each team will have 5 minutes to pitch, followed by a 3-minute question answer session with the judges. Due to time constraints, we will not be able to take questions from the audience for pitch competition. However, for subsequent sessions, you are free to send your question to us through the Q&A feature. Let me now welcome our first participant for the pitch. Team 1, Reus, please share your screen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Annalisa Samira, CEO of Reus. Reus is a medical device company that spun out of Northwestern University. We're developing a platform, non-invasive wearable sensor, initially targeting hydrocephalus that can bring significant cost savings to the healthcare system. We have a Class 2 de novo 510K device that received breakthrough designation last year by the FDA. We've raised over $2 million to date, most of which is non-dilutive, and are on track to launch our first device around this time next year. Now, the first condition that we're addressing is hydrocephalus. Now, it's a chronic neurological condition characterized by excess cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, on the brain. Now, everyone on the Zoom call has CSF, but for about 1 million Americans, they just make too much of it, and it has to go somewhere. The standard of care is neurosurgery through the placement of something called a shunt, which is essentially drains the brain of that excess fluid. Now, shunt technology has been around for about 60 years or so. The problem with shunts is that they fail, and they fail almost all the time due to things like infection, obstruction, dislodgement. And when that happens, the shunt needs to be revised, which means another neurosurgery. So it's not uncommon for kids like Jack here to have multiple brain surgeries throughout the course of their life. Not only that, non-specific things like headaches, dizziness, nausea can necessitate a trip to the emergency room, where patients are subject to imaging, which can be inconclusive, expensive, and expose patients to radiation, and this is all the diagnostic standard of care. After imaging, patients either go home because they're having a bad day unrelated to their shunts, or or they go into surgery for invasive testing and or the replacement of a shunt. And this cycle repeats itself throughout the patient's life. Over 1 million Americans have this chronic lifelong condition. The standard of care fails. Diagnostic modalities today are inconclusive, and there is no inexpensive, easy way to non-invasively monitor what's going on within the shunts until today. Reyes has developed FlowSense, a wireless non-invasive thermal sensor that is mounted on patient's skin overlying the shunt to detect the presence and magnitude of CSF. Now, it kind of looks like a bumpy Band-Aid on the skin, but in it are sensors that perform 5-minute spot checks, and data is wirelessly sent to a mobile app. Our clinical work has been published in Science and Nature family journals, and the tech has been exclusively licensed from Northwestern, and patents are an expedited path to issuance. We've gotten a lot of press in the neurosurgery suite, as well as the attention of the FDA that granted us that breakthrough designation to expedite our regulatory path. In addition to a solid regulatory path, we have a solid reimbursement path with existing codes, as well as getting our own codes as well. Now, the first device we intend to launch next year will be a single-use disposable device, which will be used in the hospital for both outpatient and inpatient settings. We're following this device with an at-home rechargeable, reusable device that has been funded by the National Science Foundation. Now, our sensor has the potential to bring significant value propositions to stakeholders across their spectrum, including a reduction in ED visits, a reduction in unnecessary testing, and a reduction in unnecessary admissions, as well as readmissions. Here's a snapshot of our esteemed clinical partners, including UCSF and Stanford Children's Hospitals, and this list is growing. In terms of financing, we've raised over $2 million to date, which includes 80% of that is non-dilutive, and that includes our MedTech Innovator Award from last year. Now, we're not stopping at hydrocephalus. We are a technology-focused company. We have a growing pipeline and already have published papers in other indications. Here's Reyes' team. We've been doing this for over 20 years and have industry partnerships, multiple FDA approvals, licenses, and exits under our belt. I steer the ship with over 16 years experience in medical devices. We're raising a $1.5 million seed round with over 700,000 in, and are about to launch our FDA trial. And if we win today, the use of our funds will be directed to our clinical trial, regulatory, and manufacturing costs. Reyes has the momentum and support to get our devices into the hands of clinicians and patients. The health economics make sense for a platform market opportunity. With an expedited regulatory path, reimbursement benefits, and a well-experienced team, we're ready to make a splash in a big and untapped market opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Team Reyes. Now we have a few minutes for questions. So judges, please feel free to bring your questions up. You may want to unmute and go on video.
Yes. Go ahead.
This is Bob Grubbs. Could you go over again exactly what your device does?
Sure. So our wireless, sensor technology provides a rapid 5-minute spot check, to detect the activity within the shunt, so we can detect whether there is flow or no flow along with the rate of flow.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Anna, this is Mike Billig with Experian Group. Tell me a little bit about your interaction with FDA thus far, and congratulations on your breakthrough designation. Great start. I saw you at MedTech Innovators too, so you've done some great things so far. But give us a little bit of idea of what you've done with FDA and what you have left with your de novo.
Thank you so much. So we met with the FDA 4 times last year, 1 time in person before the pandemic and 3 times virtually. And that was to discuss our regulatory path, where they agreed with the de novo 510(k) path. We also discussed our clinical trial design, so they're comfortable with what we're proposing, and they've given us a green light to launch. And what's left in terms of interacting with the FDA is a discussion on a usability study that is to be included with our regulatory submission.
Good. And what's the size of your clinical study? What give us a little bit of understanding on your study alone?
Sure, I'll hand that off to my colleague Adam Zisk, who's leading that effort from Reyes.
Sure. So our clinical study is 130 patients at approximately 5 sites. We're working with those sites now to finalize IRB and contracts so we can be ready to kick off here in the next month or two. It's 130 patients. It's a non-significant risk, non-IDE study.
Good.
Hi there, this is Diana Farmer. Again, congratulations on your great work. Tell me what you think the biggest clinical impact this will have. What's game changing about patient care with your device?
Adam, did you want to take that clinical question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we did have a slide on this, but I'll just speak off the cuff. The biggest challenge right now is that it is very difficult to quickly assess the patient, the flow in these shunts. And so when a patient comes into the ED or otherwise presents with kind of these non-specific symptoms, there are not a lot of good tools. So imaging does not give you any insight into the flow itself. It simply looks at ventricle size. So everything that's really at the doctor's disposal right now is essentially either invasive or does not directly measure the function of the shunt. And so that's really what we're doing differently. In addition to being able to address these issues in the hospital, I think the biggest game changer will be on the home use side, where we will be able to look at longitudinal data over the long term to actually identify potential shunt failures before they occur or as they are beginning to occur, so that we reduce the number of patients that actually present in the emergency department.
And I actually think for the patient, the impact might be to identify a problem before they get symptomatic. And so in fact, might even preserve or lessen brain damage. I think that's what you really want to do. It's great to save hospital costs. And I hope Sam's not on the call. But what you really want to do is make the patients better. And I wouldn't lose sight of that, the potential for that in terms of impact.
Right, totally agreed. And some of the ways we're doing that, like I mentioned with the home use device, that will really prevent a lot of uncertainty for patients when they have some of these non-specific symptoms. It will mean fewer trips to the emergency department in the middle of the night for worried parents, and for parents and patients that don't live in a major city right next to a large hospital with a neurosurgery department. It will mean fewer long trips to the hospital or to the closest city. And those are obviously very disruptive for families.
Okay, one question from Stephanie, please go ahead.
Hi, so I know you're raising $1.5 million, I believe, in this raise, and can you speak to how you're going to be using those funds and what total kind of capitalization are you going to need to get to market?
Sure. So we're currently raising a $1.5 million seed round, via convertible note vehicle. Around $700,000 of that is in already. And the value inflection milestones associated with that raise are the completion of the clinical trial that Adam described, along with the regulatory submission and approval de novo 510K, of our device. All of those big milestones are, fall under the umbrella of that $1.5 million raise.
And have you calculated what you're going to need to actually get into the marketplace?
That is what we need to get into the marketplace. Our device is a non-significant risk device. Our clinical trials are relatively inexpensive. This will lead to this money will take us to initial launch with our wave one, if you will, type hospitals. But we are raising a $5 to $7 million Series A round, and that's more growth capital for the hospital device, as well as additional financing for the home device.
Thank you.
Okay, I think if that's all the questions for now, thank you, Team Reyes. We'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reyes. Thank you, judges. Let's now invite the second team, Team Better Sleep Diagnosis, Better Sleep Design, sorry, Cubby Beds. Please share your screen.
Last year, I met a young boy named Josh. He's fun, smart, and loved by his family, but he also has autism, and this makes life a little bit harder. Over 80% of kids with autism have daily sleep issues like Josh, and over half have severe safety concerns like seizures, self-injury, and elopement. And these issues don't only affect Josh, they affect his entire family. A root cause of these issues is sensory processing. This is why you might see many kids with autism out in public wearing big headphones or rocking back and forth. Sleep is constantly disrupted by this sensitivity, and it often causes a fight or flight response. Or in other words, they run out of the house or have meltdowns where they may hurt themselves or harm others. Right now, families try to solve this in a few ways. The first are drugs, which are often prescribed as toddlers and can have terrible side effects. While I've seen countless iterations of parent-made products, the professional products are essentially glorified cages with zero technology or sensory features. But what's validating is these products have tens of millions of dollars in revenue and have already set up the reimbursement and regulatory pathways for us to do the same. We're taking a different approach. Meet Cubby, a smart bed that enables a person to completely control their environment. Our canopy blocks outside stimuli, creating a cozy, safe space. We can then introduce soothing sensory inputs, such as light, sound, vibrations, weighted blankets, and aromatherapy. To help with safety, which makes our products reimbursable, we provide 360 degrees of padding for protection during meltdowns and seizures, safety sheets that prevent entrapment, and cameras linked to motion sensors that parents and caregivers can remotely monitor. The future vision is to use sensors and predictive analytics to correlate changes in environment, diet, or medication with changes in clinical outcomes like seizure activity, quality of sleep, and vital signs. In effect, this would give a voice to the 1/3 of kids with autism who are nonverbal and can't tell you what they really need. Now, you may be thinking this is a small niche market, but in fact, 1 in 54 kids are now diagnosed with autism, and autism-related healthcare costs are expected to top $500 billion by 2025, more than diabetes or stroke. And it doesn't stop there. Over half of our beds have been sold to kids with other conditions like epilepsy, cerebral palsy, and Down syndrome. And we're now getting strong interest to help in the geriatrics market with dementia and TBI. In California alone, there's over 35,000 kids with reimbursable need, creating a market of over $200 million. Expanding that outwards to all Americans with reimbursable need, we have a market of $3 billion. And worldwide can easily help over 2 million people, and many countries have better reimbursement policies for this type of product. If we go outside of reimbursable need to general sleep, sensory, and anxiety issues, the market balloons rapidly. We launched exactly about a year ago and have sold over $600,000 in beds in our first year, and I'm proud to say that we're profitable. We've been successfully reimbursed at $13,000 through over 25 DME distributors, including the 2 largest in the nation. We've now scaled up our factories and are ready to really ramp production. We filed patents, and we're an FDA-registered Class 1 510(k) exempt medical device. Most importantly, we've had life-changing reviews for these families, with parents calling our beds magic and a godsend. So there's 2 ways that we access our patient population. 40% of our sales have been direct, private pay through our website, while 60% have been through these distributors. Our year or so goal is to become an accredited DME distributor provider to improve access, control the entire process, and dramatically cut costs by over 50% on our device, saving the healthcare system a lot of money. From a business model perspective, our beds are reimbursed at $13,000. From that right now, we generate on average $6,000 revenue, leaving a 73% gross margin. When we become that distributor and don't have to pay those middleman fees, we could generate $13,000 revenue per bed. We have approved HCPCS codes that we've been successfully reimbursed on for 6 sales and recurring software long-term. We have the right team to pull this off as well. At 15, I started and scaled a 6-figure e-commerce business. And for the past 5 years, I was the top sales executive at SendGrid, which went public and then was acquired. My COO, Kevin, is on the National Autism Society board, and his past startup, Autism Pro, grossed over $10 million in their first 3 years. Donna, with 2 decades of furniture design, heads up supply chain and soft goods. We have a proven, ready product, large market, and the opportunity to make a massive impact on these kids. We hope you will support us and vote for us in this mission. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. So we are open for questions, judges.
I'll take the first one. Nice presentation and great to be out there getting sales already. That's wonderful. Tell me about what you're going to do to keep yourself above everybody else from a competition standpoint, and what others will need to do to get. How much protection do you have in your product right now?
Yeah, so I think our biggest competition is probably not the current incumbents. They've been building these devices for decades, and I don't think have the innovation roots. It's probably a new company coming in, and a young guy like me coming in with innovative ideas. I think our patents that we filed are quite strong, but likely the biggest differentiation and competitive moat is our direct-to-patient marketing and strategy there. Every competitor in the space goes through these distributors. They have no interaction with the patient. They don't get data from the bed. And long-term, our goal is to have those direct interactions with the patient through both data from the bed, as well as our distribution and reimbursement strategy of going direct to patient and controlling that entire process, removing that middleman. That's a really difficult process to build out. We're going to spend a lot of time and money doing it, but we've really scoped it out in detail. And I think if we can execute on that, that's very difficult for future competitors to come in and replace. Last thing is we've really got a big roadmap of innovation and how we build out and evolve the software and data side of the bed. And that we've got a pretty significant head start on.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think that the one thing that I'd encourage you to do is completely iterate, and not let anybody beat you to the punch.
Definitely.
Nice.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's Pierre Theodore here from J&J. You know, the sensor market in sleep technology has really exploded over the last couple of years. So I'm just wondering if you've been able to pull in any clinical or consumer data demonstrating any impact in sleep quality or any other elements of sleep that could help to underscore the value of the product. So if you could just talk to me a little about the ongoing kind of clinical research or consumer research that you're engaging in.
Yeah, so we haven't gone through clinical trials or studies yet. That's definitely on our roadmap, and we actually just won a large prize with Prime Health of Colorado to start our first pilot studies, which will then translate into clinical trials. What I will say is at this point, we have phenomenal reviews from families, with kids going from taking like 4 hours to go to sleep to 20 minutes with the sensory side of things. We also, our light, in fact, is actually provided by Philips, and they have quite a few clinical studies showing that it's improving both wakefulness on the onset of the day. It's essentially acting as a sunrise in the morning, slowly fading in sensory input, and then dramatically improving how quickly people fall asleep and the length of time on the back end. But that is very much our goal moving forward, and part of what we would use this funding for is really clinically validating a lot of these aspects. And I would say as well on that the safety side of things is really where our reimbursement plays into play. And those are pretty inherent in that it's protecting the kids that are banging their heads against drywall or having entrapment or seizure issues where they're flailing and hitting their body. Our product and the remote monitoring aspects, those are quite inherent value propositions that insurance as well as the parents and medical providers really immediately understand.
Hi, Caleb. Rick Ikemoto, Stanford Children's Health. Can you elaborate a bit more about the reimbursement? Is that through commercials and Medicaid programs? And maybe at a very high level, majority of your revenue, is it coming from that source, or are parents paying out of pocket?
Yeah, so right now about 60% of our sales have been reimbursed, and we're seeing that tick upwards further and further as our distributors get more comfortable with it, as well as these payers. Since we work with kids with special needs, a very large percentage are in Medicaid population where we've had incredible success. Some of the commercial payers are a little bit more difficult just with innovative products, but that's the great thing about having these DME distributors who have national presence, over 1,000 reps for our biggest one. They have incredible billing and reimbursement expertise for these types of products, and we've had really phenomenal success. Those HCPCS codes, they're approved. Those other beds have been using them for over a decade in several cases. So we layer in a lot of technology, better design, and a direct-to-patient marketing strategy, but we can use those previous pathways for reimbursement as well as the regulatory side, which has really sped up our path to market. But yeah, the reimbursement is incredibly important business-wise, but also access and mission standpoint. We don't want this product to squeeze families. A lot of the kids who need it the most are the kids that can't afford it, and that's where reimbursement comes into play.
Thank you, Caleb. I think we'll have to move on. Appreciate it. So let's move on to the next team, Team Osteo.
Thank you all.
Hi, my name is Jessica Denoyer. I'm the CEO of Osteo, and our goal is to improve the lives of children with craniofacial defects. Left untreated, these conditions can have debilitating to life-threatening consequences in what's otherwise a healthy child. But the treatments themselves can be devastating to these children and their families. Significant blood loss, overwhelming infection, scarring, or it may only work in a limited few. Of these treatments, distraction osteogenesis is a gentler technique in that it leverages the body's natural ability to heal. So with distraction, a device is surgically implanted and then used to slowly expand an abnormal bony segment. As the abnormal bone is expanded, new bone regenerates, thereby gradually lengthening and reshaping the affected segment. But distraction comes with its own set of challenges. So here I'm showing what distraction looks like when it's reduced to practice. And we would say this is one of the nicer images of the treatment at work. But these devices are primordial. They all have an external component that pokes through the child's skin post-operatively to allow for manual expansion of the device. A parent then has to take a screwdriver, attach it, rotate it a prescribed number of times, up to several times a day, in order to provide treatment. This external component increases patient risk for infection. The very act of taking a screwdriver and following a surgeon-directed protocol is imprecise, unintuitive, and emotionally traumatic for many parents. And because the surgeon is blinded to the process, weekly clinical exams and x-rays are necessary in order for them to monitor treatment progress. This is where Osteo will make a big impact. Our integrated therapy includes a fully implantable device, an automated contactless driver, and a remote monitoring platform. And at a high level, our technology works by leveraging magnetic coupling between our driver and implant to transfer torque and expand the implant in a contactless manner. Because we can expand our device without contact, we were able to eliminate the external component and with that reduce the risk of associated complications. Our fully automated driver will make providing treatment as simple as a push of a button for parents, alleviating stress and reducing non-compliance. And finally, our remote monitoring platform will allow surgeons to track treatment progress in real time and address complications early on. We have 2 non-provisional patent applications protecting the general concept of our system, as well as the key features and safety functionalities of our device. We've also completed a fair bit of foundational work, including clinical studies to characterize the force requirements needed throughout craniofacial distraction treatment, as well as the distance over which contactless distraction will take place. Our early prototyping validated the feasibility of our approach, as well as the form factor of our implant and driver designs. We're now working within a quality management system and have since completed 2 additional design sprints as we push toward our alpha prototypes. We've also met with the FDA and have confirmed a Class 2 regulatory pathway. Now, these devices are unique in that they are indicated for use in both adults and pediatrics, but focusing on the pediatric market alone, It's an existing market with established reimbursement, currently valued at about $75 million in the US and growing at a healthy 7%. It's also a nicely concentrated market with a limited number of players, but all of these competitors only offer the archaic types of systems we've been discussing. Our go-to-market strategy really hinges on the specialized nature of our treatment. Because about half the procedures take place in just 49 centers, we're able to go to market in a very capital efficient way while still capturing a significant procedure base. Our plan would be to partner with a handful of influential academic centers in which we would pilot our system while building out the clinical and health economic data needed to support our value proposition. We would then drive awareness and penetration through these KOL relationships. We've also completed a health economic analysis, and because our system addresses complications or addresses features of existing devices that are linked to complications, we were able to show that we could reduce hospital costs by up to $4,000 per patient. We have about $1 million invested into the company, half dilutive, half non-dilutive. This early financing allowed us to complete our foundational work as well as begin our regulated product development efforts. We're just kicking off a $3 million seed round to get us through the rest of design engineering, verification, validation testing, and 510(k) submission. And finally, our team has clinical translation and medical device industry knowledge that spans all of the necessary functions needed to bring this technology safely to market. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. We're now open for questions.
I have a question, Bronwyn Harris here. What do you see as, the trajectory? So saw your revenues, but, would you expect maybe one of those current companies in the space to acquire in the future? Or are you, thinking that you want to be a standalone and then maybe add additional products into your company in the future?
No, our goal is to reach as many of these children worldwide. We believe that this treatment is truly transformational as compared to what they currently have available to them. And so our goal would be to partner with one of those strategics, whether through distribution or acquisition, and really leverage the commercial footprint that they have in place worldwide.
Got it. Makes sense. Thanks.
Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering to what extent you've validated your value proposition with customers. Have you done much customer discovery, and what did you learn through it?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of different things. So we did one formal survey that included 35 parents and 15 surgeons, which has been published to really validate the pain points of distraction, to make sure we were solving the right problems. We've also had informal discussions with about 15 surgeons to validate the value proposition that we would bring to market.
How about with the payers? Who have you discussed?
So we haven't spoken to payers, but we have spoken to hospital supply chain managers and, from that side. So from the payer side, what I should say is that these devices are currently reimbursed under the existing DRG, and we would fit in the same way. Ari, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just add that there are also associated CPT codes for the implantation of distractors that apply to currently available technologies that our device certainly fits neatly within the language of those codes as well. So I think along with that, it's also worth mentioning that the currently available technologies enjoy a very healthy margin even for medical devices. So our system was designed to be financially viable at the current price points, even though we think down the road, once we've proven out our kind of economic benefit, there's going to be some ability to charge a premium over currently available distractors.
I guess a follow-on to the economics question is, it looks like you're raising about $5 million total, or you've already got some and you're adding on. with a market size of 75 million, which is pretty small, how are you going to get an ROI?
Yeah, so it's 75 million in the US. This doesn't account for anything outside of the US. Worldwide, there are about 180,000 patients who require some type of treatment for these craniofacial defects. But in addition, as I mentioned, these devices are indicated for use in both adults and pediatrics. And in the adult population, one area where mandibular lengthening and mandibular distraction in particular is emerging as a safe and effective treatment is for surgical obstructive sleep apnea, which also currently today is about $170, $180 million market. But there are another 350,000 patients just in the US alone who have severe obstructive sleep apnea and that have failed non-surgical treatment and really have little opportunity for treatment outside of surgery. That we think is a potentially explosive downstream opportunity that we could tap into. The other thing I should mention is the economics work out well in that there's high willingness to pay in this segment. The companies enjoy high margins. So even just focusing on the pediatric population alone, by year 2 of sales, we are covering our operational costs.
Thank you. We have one question from Avi Rup.
Yep, thank you. Can you talk to me about where you think you'll get claims on your device? What sort of apparatus claims do you think you'll get? Is it around the coupling agent, in the coupling mechanism, or what do you think you'll end up getting in terms of intellectual property?
Do you want to handle that, Ari?
Sure, yeah. So I think a lot of our core IP, kind of the first patent covers magnetically driven distraction in the craniofacial skeleton. The reason that we and our lawyers think that's novel is because it takes on a different form factor than magnetically expandable distractors, which are already on the market for spine and long bone put out by the company NuVasive. Because of the anatomical constraints of the craniofacial skeleton and the different kind of specs required of a device, it's required kind of a different creative solution to fitting distraction with magnetically expandable technology. So I would say that's one bin of our IP. The other bin is really key safety features. Obviously, for all the limitations of currently available distractors, there is something nice about knowing that if your screwdriver is on the head of the device appropriately and you can turn it 360 degrees, that there is some tactile feedback. So, it's critical to us that our device gives even more transparency into the process of what's happening internally. And so there's a number of safety features that we've developed around expansion monitoring and monitoring of different key complications around distraction. So that's really kind of the second bin where we're focused on from an IP standpoint.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, team. Let's move on, and we'll go to Otis next.
Next team, Otis Valve Technologies. Please share your screen.
Good morning. My name is Sophie Hofferberth. I am co-founder and president of Otis Valve Technologies, which is developing an expandable pulmonary valve for children. Unlike adult heart valve disease, heart valve defects in children are not curable. Instead, these patients face a lifelong treatment paradigm. Pulmonary valve disease is the most common congenital valve defect. Today, there is 500,000 children suffering with pulmonary valve disease worldwide. This number is increasing by 24,000 per year. So why do 500,000 children endure unnecessary suffering today? There's multiple reasons. Firstly, there is no FDA-approved surgical valve for the pulmonary position. Existing off-label prosthetic valves are implanted, but these are fixed in size. This means that children require multiple invasive reoperations to replace outgrown valves. There is no valve prosthesis available under 19 millimeters, which means that there is no valve to fit children under 10 years of age. As a consequence, most clinicians delay referral for surgery until the children reach near adult size. Without a functional pulmonary valve, there is dilation of the right ventricle, which leads to fibrosis and risk of heart failure as the children grow up. Ultimately, these children have a reduced long-term survival. 1 in 4 will die before age 30. So what if an implantable valve could expand to grow with a child? To address this critical unmet need, we look to nature to solve this problem. By mimicking the structure and geometry of the human venous valve, which is designed to accommodate vessel expansion, we designed the size-adjustable Otis valve. Here, at its nominal size of 12.7 millimeters, it is suitable for implantation in a 2-year-old child. It is balloon expandable post-implant. Here it's shown at 18 millimeters, which would fit a child at 10 years of age. And the device can be further expanded up to a near adult size of 22 millimeters. The Otis valve represents the first size adjustable valve technology. It is a surgical pulmonary valve replacement that is manufactured at a single size of 12.7 millimeters. The device is balloon expandable post-implant via minimally invasive transcatheter balloon dilation. The valve is fully synthetic, made from off-the-shelf materials that have a long track record of clinical use. To date, since the project inception in 2016, we've conducted extensive preclinical testing, including accelerated wear testing to 200 million cycles, long-term animal studies in growing lambs, where we expanded the valve on multiple occasions to accommodate growth. These successful studies have resulted in a design freeze. And we recently received an NIH phase 1 STTR grant, as well as conducting multiple pre-submission meetings with the FDA. As a result of these very positive interactions, we now have a clear pathway to the first-in-human early feasibility study, and it has been recommended that we submit for breakthrough designation once we obtain initial clinical data. We have engaged with experienced manufacturers and vendors in the valve space. We are currently conducting preclinical and DV testing with test plans that have been approved by FDA. A PCT was filed with this technology in 2018, and notice of allowance was issued in February of this year for the US application. We are currently negotiating an exclusive license for the technology with Boston Children's Hospital. These are the company founders, and we are working with a supporting team that consists of highly experienced consultants and vendors in the valve industry. Our goal is to complete manufacturing and DV testing by Q2 of 2021 and achieve conditional approval for the first-in-human early feasibility study at the end of this year. We are engaging in a $5 million fundraise to complete the early feasibility study and continue development of the technology. To summarize, this valve represents the first size adjustable valve technology. It addresses a critical unmet need. The value proposition that this offers is enormous. There is the chance for improved patient outcomes, preventing children from requiring multiple open heart operations, as well as huge cost savings for the health system. There is a clear regulatory pathway to the first-in-human study, and a patent has been issued. We are engaged in advanced discussion with strategics, and we are very excited about the progress of this technology. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Q&A from the judges. Go for it.
Yeah, Sophie, nice presentation, and certainly there's a tremendous need there without question. Tell me a little bit about what you've interacted with FDA at this time, and then go into a little bit of what you're planning for your feasibility study and then ultimately your pivotal.
Right, thank you. We've had 2 meetings with the FDA, and really what the FDA has said is that they've accepted the chronic animal studies, and they're working with us to develop the remaining bench testing that is required in this preclinical phase.
Yep.
which is all of that's underway and has been approved by them. They have said that we would begin with a 15-patient early feasibility study in the pediatric population. So the goal is going to be that we obtain initial safety data on implantation of the device, as well as collecting data on patients who undergo valve expansions post-implant. Ultimately, we haven't discussed yet a pivotal study design with the FDA. However, the goal would be that we would incorporate patients who are followed in the early feasibility study into the pivotal study design.
Yeah, now you're close to the HUD, HDE, are you not? I mean, is there any way that you could utilize that regulatory pathway?
I believe that that is an option. However, given that you know the actual size of the market and also the premise for pediatric pivotal studies, we would like to seek the PMA pathway.
Very nice, thank you.
Okay, Avi, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, thank you. First question is, how long will the FDA requiring you follow the patient?
Right.
Like
so
before you start the pivotal, for example.
So we have ongoing or upcoming discussions with the FDA specifically regarding the design of the early feasibility study. The primary endpoint would be at 12 months post-implant, which is the you know, the safety endpoint. But as with other valve studies, it's standard to follow patients for 5 years after implantation. However, that doesn't mean that you have to wait 5 years before you can submit for a pivotal study.
Of course. And then how long do you think these valves, how long do you envision these valves staying in kids? I mean, are they taken out at some point in time, or what's sort of the next phase of the care pathway?
Right. So the way that this is designed is that while it has a maximal functional diameter of 22 millimeters, the frame can actually be further expanded. Let's say if the child outgrows the valve, they could actually undergo a valve-in-valve procedure at that time, which would mean that they wouldn't require a further reoperation. So really with this valve that can function between 12.7 and 22 millimeters, that would be suitable for a child from 2 years of age up to 18 years.
Thanks. Stephanie, you had a question?
I did. Sophie, can you speak more to your commercialization strategy? It looks like you're trying to develop relationships with strategics. How would that work? And when you say advanced discussions, what does that mean?
Right. So we have, in terms of our plan, what we're doing right now is conducting a fundraise really to conduct the early feasibility study ourselves and move forward with the required development that would enable a application for a pivotal study IDE. So that is something that we are pursuing as a company. We obviously recognize that to bring this valve all the way to market and to reach the children that require it globally, and the fact that we are academics, we believe that ultimately it's best suited to be with one of the major valve strategics. And so, you know, for us, it's very important to understand at this stage the level of interest from such groups, given that, you know, our long-term goal would be that we could partner with them.
I'm focused on your phrase advanced discussions. What does that mean? It sounds like you're close to a deal of some sort, or are you just really exploring at this point?
Right, it's really, there is, you know, we've just spoken with several strategics in the space, and there is discussions really, firstly, obviously regarding the technology and the, you know, potential clinical utility, and also its utility as a commercially viable device. and ultimately, whether there would be an interest in ultimately acquiring the technology.
So this is Bob Grubbs. There are just starting to be valves developed to use synthetic materials, and there's FDA is still worrying about how to test these and what their proper things is. How far along are you in testing the materials in terms of lifetime? Because these have to last 18 years or so.
Right. So one of the major benefits of the materials that we, particularly the leaflet material that we've chosen, it is 0.1 millimeter EPTFE, commercially available. It's actually used widely in the pediatric population in the pulmonary position. So there's actually a precedent. So from the FDA standpoint, there isn't actually significant concern about having to characterize that material prior to proceeding with clinical implantation. There is, in Japan, there is a up to 20-year experience using this leaflet material in the pulmonary position with very good results.
One last question, Dr. Theodore.
Sure, thanks very much. Fantastic presentation. I've been part of some of those strategic discussions with this firm, and it's really impressive and important technology. And one of the challenges, of course, is the relative size of the pediatric market compared to adult. You may have addressed this, but could you tell me a little bit more about the anticoagulation requirements for the percutaneous valve? And in the studies that you've done preclinically, if you could comment on thrombosis and complications related to coagulation.
Right, thank you for your question. That's it's actually obviously was a key point of interest for us. So firstly, in each of the chronic animal studies, we did not administer any chronic anticoagulation to the animals, really to test the flow characteristics of the valve. And we didn't see any evidence of thrombosis in any of the 15 chronic animals that were studied. This was also evaluated on histology. So that was a very key finding. In fact, the plan for the early feasibility study is to administer aspirin only to the patients. So this is also another significant benefit of this valve. And the hypothesis is that the flow profile induced by the bileaflet geometry, like the venous valve, creates flow recirculation that helps to wash out the valve. So that, if that proves to be true in the clinical setting, would have enormous benefits.
Thank you. Let's move on. Appreciate it. We're going to go on to the next team, Limbix.
Okay, hi there. I'm Jessica Lake. I'm the Director of Science and Innovation at Limbix, where we're building digital therapeutics for adolescent mental health disorders. And so the problem we're looking to tackle with our products is an issue of access to care in the mental health space, particularly within the adolescent population. So 60% of teens with depression receive no treatment for their symptoms. And so this is a huge problem, the numbers that you're seeing on the screen here, and it's a growing problem, and it's only expected to increase as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and an increase in social isolation and loneliness. What's going right in the mental health space is that primary care providers are screening much more frequently for mental health disorders. So we're identifying kids with behavioral health needs earlier in the process. The problem really comes in terms of a limited number of treatment options for providers particularly primary care providers, to give to their patients. So primary care providers can refer a patient to a mental health specialist, but for a number of different reasons, those referrals aren't acted upon, be it stigma, logistical or cost barriers, or really long wait lists to see a mental health specialist. And so the other really only alternative for primary care providers is to prescribe antidepressants. And antidepressants within the adolescent space are not particularly effective, and there are few that are actually indicated for adolescents. And many PCPs don't feel comfortable prescribing antidepressants within their practice. And that's really the issue that we're looking to tackle with our product Limbix Spark, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy-based program, really focuses on the B in CBT to treat the symptoms of adolescent depression. And what's really unique about our app that we've developed is that we're looking to position it as a prescription medical device that can be prescribed by doctors, primarily PCPs, as a way for them to treat their patients. And so that sort of unique positioning speaks to the strength of the safety and clinical data that we're looking to demonstrate before we go to market. Spark was developed in collaboration with adolescent experts in depression and cognitive behavioral therapy. And so these experts worked with us to make sure that the product that we're building is evidence-based and has really strong safety features that I can go into later. Probably equally as important is that Spark was co-designed with teens themselves to ensure that the product is engaging and tonally appropriate for this audience. In terms of our clinical pathway to market, we've completed an early stage feasibility study, and we're in the middle right now of a virtual randomized controlled trial comparing our product Spark to a psychoeducation control arm. And interim data, this is sort of fresh off the press, we are seeing clinically and statistically significant symptom reduction in our patients relative to our control condition in terms of PHQ-8 scores. And equally as important, we're seeing really strong engagement data relative to other depression apps. And with the strength of these findings right now, we're actually thinking about bringing the data from this virtual trial that we're conducting right now to the FDA for a 510(k) submission. And then we're looking to strengthen those claims in a really rigorously designed pivotal trial. It's a multi-site trial, double-blinded, that we're conducting in collaboration with the Duke Clinical Research Institute, supported by an SBIR Fast Track grant. And we'll be comparing Spark in this study to a sham control app, an app designed to look and feel like a treatment, but doesn't have any of the quote unquote active ingredients of our intervention. And again, we would look to submit that data to the FDA to strengthen claims from our virtual trial and go to market after that. What's unique about the time period that we're in is that the FDA has actually released an enforcement discretion policy for the product code that we are looking to have Spark cleared under in our 510(k). So if we meet a regulatory and clinical bar, we actually might be able to go to market earlier than after the submission of our 510(k). And that's our plan to go to market later this year. In terms of our commercialization strategy, we're not the first digital therapeutic company. There are others that have been cleared under this product code, as I mentioned, and we're looking to follow their example as they've paved the way in terms of having payer reimbursement as a way to have their products cleared. And it really speaks to our mission to make healthcare, mental health care for teens accessible and affordable, to sort of have this be payer reimbursed so it's affordable for teens. In terms of our commercialization progress, we have partnered in Accelerator programs with a number of different stakeholders to have our products be demonstrate value within the context of pilot studies. And that's really where our funding ask comes from. We're looking for support to fund these trials to demonstrate value to relevant payers and providers. And so with that, thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, thank you. We're now open for questions. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Jessica, can you speak to your differentiation from the competition? This is a fairly crowded space.
So I think what really differentiates us is that we are the only digital therapeutics company focusing specifically on adolescents. And so we think that's sort of the key differentiator. We've spent a lot of time ensuring that our product is appropriate for this age group. And we think that's really what differentiates us from the other players in the digital therapeutic space. And then relative to other sort of commercially available products, we think the rigor of the clinical evidence that we intend to collect and demonstrate in terms of, again, safety and efficacy are going to be the differentiation point relative to those commercially available products.
George, you had a question?
Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and thank you for showing data. That was something to sink our teeth into. Can you comment on the clinical value of that degree of improvement? What's really needed? What a clinician would really observe as an improvement?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we are using, as I have shown, the PHQ-8 in terms of demonstrating clinical reduction in symptoms. And that's largely driven by the fact that that is the main scale that primary care providers, we expect to be sort of the main users and or prescribers of this product to follow. And so on that scale, a reduction of 5 points on the PHQ-8 is considered a clinically significant reduction that takes you from, from a moderate to a mild level. And so we are seeing within our, within the use of our product Spark, that we are seeing this clinically significant reduction in PHQ scores from the use of our product.
Thank you.
Dr. Harris, you had a question for the.
Yeah, you mentioned that there is already reimbursement for this. I was wondering what's the amount, and therefore, what sort of market size are you thinking for this? And, is it that you would stay solely within adolescent, which is, what is unique about you, or is there somewhere to go from there, or really you just want to own that market?
Yeah, so to that second point, we are, at this stage really looking to own the adolescent market. So when we sort of move forward beyond our product Spark, we're looking to expand to different indications within the adolescent space. And so that's really where we see sort of our sweet spot and where we've built a lot of time in developing processes to reach that target market. And there's really great need within that space to address mental health issues. And in terms of reimbursement, there are, as I mentioned, other companies that are sort of paving the way here. And I don't think everyone has it figured out. And we're looking within the context of our trials that we conduct with health systems and with payers to really demonstrate the health economic values, which are going to shape the reimbursement amount that we expect to get from our product.
Curious though, just like range, like what type of, is it, a monthly, like per kind of a treatment, like ballpark, $10,
Yes.
$100 type?
Sure, yeah, within the space, typically it's a one-time fee that people have set up in the sort of 500 range.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, team. And let's move on to our next presenters, baby steps.
Thank you, Shuvo. So we are now to the team 6, baby steps orthopedics. Please share your screen.
My name is Anu Dayal, and I'm the founder and CEO of Baby Steps. I'm a pediatrician, and I work with children who have complex medical and orthopedic problems. And I saw an unmet need in how we can innovate care delivery for these patients. And today I want to talk to you about one subset, children who are born with clubfoot. So clubfoot is a 3-dimensional deformity of the foot, as you can see in this picture. It's present at birth, and the foot is twisted inward and upward. It has an incidence of about 1 to 2 per 1,000. And the current standard of care is from the 1960s. Trained pediatric orthopedic surgeons use the non-surgical serial casting method to gradually but precisely move the foot into a normal position by placing a new cast on the baby every week for about 6 weeks. And even though you might not have heard of this condition, it was actually seen in drawings on the walls of the pyramid. And children who go untreated walk on the outer edge of their foot for the rest of their life. But I think the most impactful thing for me was the following. Chrissy Yamaguchi, Mia Haim, and Troy Aikman, they all had this condition as a baby, and they went on to be world-class athletes. So then you might ask, what is the problem? Well, the main problem is this: access to care. This is not a normal cast that you can go to your emergency room and have placed. This is a heat map of pediatric orthopedic surgeons in the United States. As you can see, they're mostly around ski towns. We spun out of Washington, DC, and our patients come from 3 different states to seek care. And sometimes their journeys are about 6 hours round trip. And you can imagine this is worse even globally. The second main challenge is a cast saw. So an infant skin is much more delicate than an adult's, and they're more prone to injury. And then finally, just keeping the baby clean. When you have a plaster cast, you can't get it wet. And as you can see, the cast goes from the toes all the way to the groin, which means during treatment, you can't bathe your baby from the waist down. And we won't even talk about diaper overflow. So the question is, how can we improve that? And the answer is baby steps. So what we do is we take a 3D image of the initial deformity. And then using our software platform, we can analyze the deformity and then predict each step of correction. And then finally, we can 3D print a cast specifically for that patient. And we like to call this Invisalign for clubfoot. And we are helping solve the problems in this process in 3 main ways. So first, we're now introducing imaging into this process. Not only does it take out the guesswork and it democratizes access, but it also provides a new data source to understand this condition. Next, we're eliminating the cast saw. With this design, you can just snap on and snap off the cast easily in an orthopedic clinic, which improves hospital throughput. And some of these steps can actually be performed at home with supervision with telemedicine. And then finally, the design itself, it's biocompatible, so you can place it directly on the skin. The holes in the cast make it waterproof, so you can bathe your baby. And this market is really ripe for innovation. There's been no innovation since we landed on the moon. There are 3D printed casts on the market, but they don't work for children for deformity correction. And the current medical devices for serial casting in the market are really focused on after the correction is already performed. We've been generously supported by grants to date, including most recently from the Pediatric Orthopedic Society of North America. From a regulatory standpoint, we do have consultants and we are talking about Class 1 versus Class 2 filings. And for commercialization, we have 2 models. In Tier 1 countries, we plan on an annual software license for our cloud-based software technology, and then we will partner with 3D printing companies. In low and middle income countries, we plan a per-use basis for the cloud-based technology. And the total addressable market is substantial. Global clubfoot is about 85 million, but this technology can also be used for serial casting and cerebral palsy. And we can also expand to other adult conditions that also use serial casting, such as MS, stroke, TBI, and spinal cord injury. And we are marching through our milestones. We have filed our utility patent, and we're preparing for prospective studies, and any future funding will help support those and any future filings. And we have a rockstar team of physicians, mathematicians, engineers, and we are excited for you to join us in our mission of providing personalized care for these children. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. We're now open for questions from the judges.
Annie, it's Pierre here. It's great to see you again, and thank you
Pierre.
for a fantastic presentation. So one thing, we've talked a little about your technology in the past. I've always been curious about, do you anticipate that the parents will be placing the cast in place, the 3D printed cast, or is that something that clinician would do serially? So is the idea that the parents would take a bit more of an active role in the management of the clubfoot? And because ultimately there's a surgical correction needed, could you just explain how this actually increases the efficiency of the process? Because at the end of the day, you eventually have to move on to a surgical correction. So if you could address those 2 issues, that would be great. And nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. And thanks for your important question. So, what we imagine is that, the parent will always have to be diagnosed by the pediatric orthopedic surgeon, but out of, the 6 to 7 steps, some of those could actually be performed at home. And then you can come into the hospital for monitoring for the other ones. To your point about the surgical correction, before just the last step, surgeons at the bedside have to do a small incision in the back of the heel, and that step will continue. But I do believe that the rest of them will be able to do a mix of clinic and at home.
Okay, Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. Very nice presentation, and again, terrific clinical need for this without question. Could you tell me a little bit about what you're going to do? I know you're filing patents right now, but I think that the competition is going to be fierce, certainly if you show good success with what you've done. How are you going to protect that, and what's your end goal with this company?
Yeah, thank you for that. So our patent filings right now are for the predictive software, which is agnostic for musculoskeletal or neuromuscular conditions in pediatric or adults. And we also have a artificial intelligence component to that as well. I think 3D printed casting companies are up and coming, which is fantastic. I think the unique thing about this is the predictive part of that. 3D printing casting companies right now can only align fractures that are, already straight. And what this is adding is a new market actually for them using our proprietary algorithms.
Dr. Farmer?
Yes, thank you very much. Great presentation and really important area. My question is, do you envision a future where this might be able to be translated to the developing country environment, where you might be able to train a allied health professional to do this? So really the question is, how do you get this to the patients who are in the greatest need?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So actually my last trip before COVID shut down was to Casa, Africa. And that was a partnership between medical schools locally and medical technology companies who are specifically working on, taking care like this to the people who don't have access. And we've also formed partnerships with Miracle Feet, which is a huge NGO for clubfoot, and we are talking with them on how this can be delivered to their patients as well. So that's a huge part of our market.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you to the team, and we'll move to our next group.
Thank you. Team 7, Mica Labs and UCSF Surgical Innovations. Mica Labs, please share your screen.
Hi, my name is Carissa Chen. I'm the clinical lead for Mica Labs, and today I'll be talking about the Connect ES. So we're going to be talking about recalcitrant, which is difficult to treat esophageal stricture, which is a narrowing of the esophagus lumen due to scar tissue. This severely limits kids' ability to swallow and eat, and often kids will even have to have a feeding tube placed directly into their stomach because they can't eat by their mouth. So as you can imagine, this is extremely morbid and life-limiting. These kids aren't able to have a normal childhood because they're in and out of the hospital so much. Worldwide, tens of thousands of kids are affected. And while I'll be focusing on pediatric esophageal stricture today, there are other high unmet need populations within the GI tract that we hope to bring products to market. So our total market opportunity for all recalcitrant GI tract strictures is about $150 million. These recalcitrant strictures don't respond to initial treatment because the current mainstay of therapy is entering the esophagus endoscopically and ballooning open the dilation to break up that scar tissue. But we're actually finding out that the radial pressure from the balloons is causing more scar tissue to form. So with that in mind, we developed a suite of technology to address the underlying pathophysiology of stricture formation. So our solution, the Connect ES, is a system that utilizes advanced informatics and precision engineering to optimize the approach for each individual stricture. Our approach is entirely endoluminal or minimally invasive, meaning it doesn't require any incisions or sutures. And what we do is we compress the fibrotic tissue and excise it instead of the radial dilation, which exacerbates the scar. And we do this by precisely placing a magnetic anchor on each end of the stricture. The magnetic anchors pair and gradually compress that scar tissue, eventually excising it altogether. And when the lumen is newly patent, the magnetic pair will fall off spontaneously and can either exit through the GI tract or be retrieved. And what we're left with is the physiological equivalent of a surgical stricturoplasty, but without all the disadvantages of that procedure. So currently kids with recalcitrant ES have very few options. The first line of therapy is serial balloon dilations over the course of months to years. And this does sometimes work, but there is a risk of perforation of the esophagus. There's a risk of exacerbating the scar. And also worth mentioning is the cost of frequent hospitalizations, frequent procedures requiring general anesthesia, these kids missing school, their parents missing work. There are also surgical options, but these have a high associated morbidity. The surgical stricturoplasty is a major chest operation with a high recurrence of stricture, and the absolute last resort is replacing the esophagus altogether with a kid's colon or stomach directly connected to their mouth. And this procedure has high mortality and very poor outcomes. So overall, not a lot of good options for these kids, which is why we believe that the Connect ES can completely transform our clinical approach to esophageal stricture that's recalcitrant. So it is designed to be minimally invasive, but it also will permanently resolve esophageal stricture. So the true value of our device is the drastic improvement in patient outcomes and also the improved quality of life for these kids and their parents. So we've already made a ton of great progress. We've filed multiple utility patents in the US and other key international markets. For our precursor product, we've performed promising preclinical studies in piglets where we've demonstrated safety and probable efficacy. More recently, we've done a first-in-human case series for our precursor products. So we did 3 babies in Germany, 2 in the US, all of which were very promising. And then in the next couple of years, we'll be focusing on preclinical and clinical studies. For regulatory, we plan to submit as a humanitarian device exemption. And then for our commercialization strategy, we'll be targeting 5 to 10 centers of excellence for esophageal stricture, and we'll be using the 99 code reimbursement. We are currently raising Series A funding to meet these milestones. So we are partnering with pediatric surgeons and gastroenterologists at centers of excellence for esophageal stricture. We've already made great connections with some of these people. Other stakeholders for our device include patients, their families, and payers. And lastly, we've put together a great multidisciplinary team of physicians, engineers, and biomedical device specialists to make this happen. We are also collaborating with international and national opinion leaders. So to summarize, we're very excited by the progress we've made and also all that we plan to still accomplish. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carissa. So we're now open for questions. Go ahead, Diana.
Well, I just want to congratulate you on this great work. It's been fun to see this concept evolve through the years and finally come to fruition. I take you all back to Sam Hawgood's opening remarks about the combination of great excitement and fear with some of the first attempts at manipulating the esophagus in these babies with esophageal atresia, and you are now, of course, addressing one of the most important clinical problems that continues to affect these children. My question is, what do you think your initial target population will be? Do you think it's the most recalcitrant strictures? Do you think you want to use it early on in ones that aren't so bad? How do you envision approaching the initial patient population here?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Farmer. That's a good question. So we focus specifically on recalcitrant esophageal stricture. So there is a subset of population of kids who respond to one initial dilation. This is often kids that have caustic congestion. Sometimes those respond better. And we are really trying to target the kids who have failed many other alternative treatments, maybe don't have other things left to try, minus these large surgeries that are very morbid. So we've focused and we've developed this market specifically for recalcitrant esophageal strictures.
Great.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, beautiful presentation. Very, very nicely done. And I'm glad to see that there's an opportunity here with an HUD, HDE program, because I think that's a marvelous program within FDA to bring forward, simply because you have a very small market to begin with, but the reality is that you have to show a safety element to it and a presumption of effectiveness, certainly with the HDE. What do you see happening as you get through this HDE? You're still limited to that population, 9,000 patients. What do you see that this could progress to after that HDE has been out for 2-3 years, certainly there's a big population that's untreated right now, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. But do you see this technology moving into other areas?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren.
Jump in, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm her co-clinical lead, so I can go ahead and answer that question. So I think that there are several other areas in the adult populations that have high unmet needs where recalcitrant strictures have become very, very difficult to treat. Those areas specifically are in adult short segment esophageal stricture, and that's very difficult to treat for the very same reasons that it's difficult to treat in children. And then in adult strictures related to inflammatory bowel disease, we also see quite a similar pathophysiology in the sense that they have a high risk of recurrence and tend to be difficult to treat surgically or with currently available therapies. So as we go to market and start with sales in the pediatric world with the HDE there, we plan to use very similar technology, potentially mildly modified, and then expand into those adult populations as well. So that'll increase the market size to about 150 million.
No, that's great. And don't get me wrong. I believe there's such an importance in the pediatric market without question. And so that's where we have focused the attention here today. But at the same time, there are opportunities elsewhere, and that's good to see. And I expected there would be.
Sorry, I lost my internet connection, but
no worries.
A more than adequate response.
You just didn't want to answer my question.
All right. I think we're good. So I think let's move on. Thank you very much, guys. And we'll move on to our next team.
Sure, I think Stephanie had a question.
Okay, Stephanie, do you want to go ahead then?
Yeah, thanks, Usha. I just wondered if you could speak to your commercialization plan. I know it's pretty far away, but what have you thought about? Do you want to be a freestanding company or license your technology? What's the goal here?
Sure. Carissa, I'll take it. Really the model that we're using in terms of commercialization is the Axio stent, which was a company that was acquired by Boston Scientific a couple of years ago. It's a GI stent that's used in the adult population that has somewhat similar indications, also placed endoscopically, also would be class 2. I think it's a de novo 510(k) approval through the FDA. And I think that model is something that we're planning to follow in terms of both the approval process as well as acquisition down the line.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on, I guess, Usha.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Shuvo. So next is Team 8, Kat Bach from Stanford University. Please share your screen.
Hi, my name is Ben Shui. I'm one of the pediatric anesthesiologists and professor at Stanford. Today, I'm very happy to present on behalf of biomedical and also biodesign to present and clinician to present our umbilical catheter monitoring system. We know that the umbilical catheter is one of the most common central line replaced in neonate, over 300,000 catheter per year in sick baby. But however, despite this, catheter still mainly introduced blindly with estimated length and only confirmed with the X-ray afterward. So in other words, since we don't using real-time guidance, a lot of time the catheter may end up in the wrong place, we have to replace it. Despite that, this catheter also have an intrinsic high risk and tight margin. We have to put the catheter above the liver and below the heart. When it's too high, it can damage the heart. When it's too low, it can damage the liver. And also this catheter have been known to be migrate within quite commonly of 50% within 48 hours. This contributes significant mortality. Now, clearly there's a clinical gap that we have, that we don't have a real-time guidance and we don't have monitoring device. So the cat watch device basically try to introduce to watch the catheter, constantly provide real-time tracking and monitoring. How we did it? Actually in 2005, I'm the first one who described using EKG signal by picking up from the catheter, we can know where's the location. The concept is simple, similar to the GPS system. By tracking the location, pick up the signal, then we know the target location. In the clinical scenario, we pick up the EKG signal from the tip of the catheter. We know by interpreting the EKG signal, we know where's the location, as usually in my earlier publication. Obviously, the limitation of that, we need the trained healthcare profession, and that will present a lot of challenge in terms of monitoring 24 hours. Recently, we overcome this problem by placing additional target surface electrode on the patient surface by picking up additional electrical signal. By comparing this signal and the catheter tip signal, we can pinpoint where's the location of the catheter. This is usually what I mean by that. If when the catheter and the surface is more in line, the EKG signal are similar, so they become the difference will be minimum. And not only that, because the neonate heart rate is about 140, practically we're checking 140 times per minute. Now, if our catheter migrate forward, because of the EKG signal different, it will trigger alarm. Or when the catheter gets pulled back, also will trigger another alarm to alert the clinician to regarding the catheter. Now, what's the economic value of this? It can be tremendous. Based on the publication that over 10,000 complication events, but just thinking about one complication can extend the NICU day for 1 day. We're talking 30 million. This is not accounting for the patient suffering from the event. In terms of regulatory, actually my earlier publication already triggered people already using this technique to placing central for PIC line, but obviously this is not suitable for neonate and there's no monitoring capability. However, it do serve a purpose for us as a predicate and facilitate our future FDA approval. In terms of the IP, we already filed our patent in terms of EKG concept by differential method and also the digital algorithm. In terms of commercialize, clearly we have a potential to have a consumer item. Let's say we have $100 a piece that we can potentially 30 million per year. And we can work with multiple different companies from monitoring to catheter stabilization company. In summary, basically, in 2008, we have the concept to solve this unmet need. And with the Stanford Cola grant, we're able to prove the concept on a real patient neonate. Now we get to the final stage that if we obtain sufficient granting, we are confident we can generate the clinical evidence and lead to clinical adaptation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're now open for questions. Go ahead, George.
Thank you very much. A very interesting problem, certainly a big problem and interesting potential solution. One concern I have is that by triggering an alarm, you would overtax the nursing and in fact, kind of cry wolf too much. How much assurance can you give that if it triggers an alarm, you really have a situation that requires intervention, X-ray or some other actionable event versus too many alarms going off and alarm fatigue at the bedside?
Okay, it's a good question. Actually, we built into the system that basically with a different electrode. That's why we have a pack of the electrode patch. Basically, we can titrate the threshold, how far away the catheter movement in order to trigger the alarm. So in other words, titratable is an algorithm that we detect the difference between EKG, and then you can actually adjust the sensitivity according to your clinical requirement.
Okay, thank you. And then how about obviously there's a huge range of sizes of babies that you would have a UVC in. So would you have one patch for all different sizes of babies, or would there be different patches? How does that work? Because obviously in the very small babies where it can be a particular problem, it's going to be much more difficult because the movement is going to be much smaller between the liver and the UVC.
Yeah, correct. That's why we have an array of the patches. what from our basic clinical first proof of concept, basically we're talking about 3 inches, 2 to 3 inches patches, but we have multiple LCD and sensor to say to adjust what's the threshold you want to alarm once you confirm the location of the target.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Rick. We actually don't hear you, Rick.
Sorry, the average selling price. Can you talk a bit about what was presented on the slide? Is it predicted at $100?
The $100 is basically will be the consumable item with the electrode. The electrode we're using is just like a regular EKG electrode, just align into the way. And the algorithm and interpret in terms of the location will be determined by the digital algorithm built into the existing monitor or standalone device.
Anybody else? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Thank you, Shuvo. Next is Octus Surgical.
So I'm John Baird. I'm the founder and CEO of Octus Surgical. I'm here today to talk about our dynamic vertebral body tethering system that treats pediatric scoliosis in a non-fusion way. So now there's millions of kids with scoli in the US. A lot of them advanced to bracing therapy, which has limitations in both compliance and effectiveness. And then they advanced to fusion surgery, which we're trying to avoid. It's a very traumatic surgery, lots of complications, lots of hardware, and oftentimes problems for life. So this is a new therapy that's been kind of on the scene for a couple of years now called vertebral body tethering. It uses the principle of growth modulation, whereby you place a tether with screws along the side of the spine, and that constrains one side of the spine as the child grows and they grow into a straight spine. It's a really elegant procedure that really was invented by a bunch of surgeons who took an off-label product from Zimmer and made it work. And they've gotten great results, but there's lots of limitations to this approach. It wasn't designed for this. Here's the power of this procedure though. This was a patient from Dr. Mohammed Diab at UCSF who was an 11-year-old girl looking at fusion. He put a tether in her, and 2 years later, she had a straight spine and a great outcome. So we're gonna, VBT will provide growth, motion, and it's just a single, potentially endoscopic surgery. So we're gonna address all these concerns with our solution, and really it's gonna be a dynamic approach to tethering with the ability to adjust non-surgically over time with an external magnetic controller. I'll just kind of show you how this works. So screws are implanted in the side of the spine, the lateral side of the spine. Our magnetic engine is implanted at the base. Tether runs up through the screws, is affixed at the top. And then over time, the spine will gradually straighten with growth, but also can be adjusted periodically with our external engine. And then as the spine straightens and gets to the final position, the tether can be released to allow full motion. So we put this in a couple of pigs. Pigs ran around for 10 weeks, did great. Our system was adjusted. Nothing broke. It was very durable. And we really learned what we wanted to learn. Now we feel very confident moving to a clinical system. A couple different patents in process, and we've got some other IP. This all started when I met Mike Harrison, several years back, and now we've gotten to the point where we're ready for clinical use. We've won a couple of PDC awards, and recently were awarded Best New Spine Technology in 2020 by Orthopedics This Week, which was a well-known industry publication. Team is a group that's been together before on a previous successful spine company, Coalign Innovations. We grew the business and sold it to Stryker. Our surgeon co-founders are a group of very experienced deformity surgeons. Mohammed Harshgrul and Steve Wong are all pediatric deformity guys that have done hundreds of procedures in the tethering world. So they really know what they're doing, and they really know what has to happen. Market is actually quite large. 20,000 odd patients are in the world that's getting tethered today. These are younger kids, still growing with curves approaching 50 degrees, but we want to move into the next level, which is early intervention. So once surgeons become comfortable with the procedure, it's endoscopic, they'll treat earlier to avoid bracing and certainly fusion. And this all adds up to potentially a $3 billion market. The group from Shriners has done lots of procedures and collected lots of data, and they've been able to demonstrate significant cost savings over fusion, 50,000 versus 150,000 for procedures. As I mentioned before, the Zimmer system is limited. The tether itself tends to break in 20% of the cases in many series, and it's static. Once you put it in, you can't touch it. So kids actually outgrow their tether, which requires another surgery to take it out. So now we're marching towards an IDE is our plan. We're working on our preclinical testing. Goal is to begin this trial first half of 2022 and ultimately pursue a de novo 510K. In the middle of a $2 million raise, which will get us into that trial and even begin the trial. So why us? Non-fusion adjustable deformity is really one of the holy grails of spine surgery. Everybody wants to see something happen here. The parents, the kids, and the surgeons are looking for a better solution here. And we've got the team to make it happen. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Yeah, we're open now for questions. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, nice presentation, John.
Hey, Mike.
Zimmer ended up doing an HDE. Why have you chosen to go ahead with the de novo 510K?
Well, we've gone back and forth on this in many cases, and we've realized what you have to do for the HDE will all almost parallel what the de novo 510K is. And we just feel like we've got to get the approval eventually. And the moment someone gets a real approval, that HDE goes away. So we just feel like, let's just go after the de novo. We're kind of talking to the FDA. We haven't decided definitively, but I think that's the pathway we're going to take.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to which one can you get to quicker.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if they're going to give you some allowance to do the HUD, HDE, as Zimmer did, you know, that's always could be a preferable pathway, but certainly a de novo is going to open the door to a number of others, 510Ks, as you know. So
yeah,
it's one of these. It's one of these.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a while, so actually it's
yep.
You know, it may change, but for now, I think we decided to pursue the de novo.
And you have had discussions with FDA.
Yeah, multiple discussions.
Very good. Thanks.
Hi, it's Pierre Theodore here. I can't avoid taking advantage to ask a little bit about scoliosis itself, the condition. You mentioned potentially moving a little bit more proximate and addressing some of these cases in younger patients. When typically does the disease become clinically manifest to the point that intervention is possible? And what does a possibility look like for early intervention for this disease, and at what age might that be? I've done a couple of these procedures with Muhammad in the past with a different device, and I'm just curious if you could give us some perspective on how early you can go. Yeah, early intervention doesn't necessarily mean age. It means curve. So, you know, these kids often have to be treated very young, 2, 3, 4 years old. The sweet spot tends to be for the early kids that have to have something happen, like 7, 8, 9 years old. And eventually they get to be skeleton mature and get fusions at 16. So the goal is to get them before that curve advances too far, and maybe even before they are braced, so they avoid any bracing or fusion surgery down the road. And there's lots of entry points, and it tends not to be age. It tends to be, you know, what the spine condition presents you. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? If not, thank you. And let's move on to the next team, Starlight.
Thank you, Shuvo. So team 10, Starlight Cardiovascular. Please share your screen.
Hi, I'm Bev Tang, co-founder and CEO of Starlight Cardiovascular. At Starlight, we've brought together an incredibly experienced and motivated team that is dedicated to solving unmet needs for children born with congenital heart disease. We're very excited to be here today, and I'm happy to be presenting with our VP of R&D, Mark Yurovich. Imagine that you've just welcomed a new baby into your family, but within a day, she starts to turn blue due to lack of oxygen. She's part of the 1% of babies that are born each year with a congenital heart defect. You're told that your newborn needs an emergency procedure to survive. The two options are heart surgery performed on cardiopulmonary bypass, where a shunt is sewn in, or a catheter-based procedure where a stent is placed to open a naturally occurring conduit called the ductus arteriosus. Most parents and clinicians would choose the catheter procedure. The ductus arteriosus, shown here, joins the pulmonary and systemic circulations in utero and usually closes within the baby's first week. But in certain critical congenital heart defects, the ductus is the only thing keeping the baby alive, supplying blood to either the lungs or body. In the past 10 years, interventional cardiologists have begun to use stents to keep the ductus open and replace the surgical procedure.
However, there are many problems with repurposing off-the-shelf coronary or biliary stents in the ductus anatomy, which can lead to a reported 47% reintervention rate. Not only, the delivery systems are often also too large for newborn anatomy. Tortuous anatomy prevents stiff balloon-mounted systems from navigating around bends of the ductus, and complex 3D anatomy makes exact length measurements under 2D fluoroscopy difficult, often leading to choosing the wrong stent size or double or tripling. In contrast, our self-expanding Lifeline stent is designed specifically for the ductal stenting procedure and offers a number of benefits over the currently repurposed adult coronary stents. The small microcatheter delivery system reduces vasospasm risk and allows for a much smoother navigation of tortuous ducts compared to balloon-mounted systems. The flange design prevents migration and anchors a stretchable stent body that provides end-to-end vessel coverage without having to know the exact length of the ductus. Anchoring mechanisms and adjustability features take advantage of the ductus's unique anatomy between two great vessels and are included in the provisional patents we've already filed. And finally, the stent balances conformability and radial force that allows the ductus to be kept open even in curved anatomies.
Starlight recognized early on that it will require a toolkit of devices to treat congenital heart disease. We used the biodesign filtering methodology to prioritize a list of 50 unmet clinical needs in this space, which factored in patient impact, market opportunity, technical and clinical risk, the regulatory pathway, and reimbursement. This prioritization led us to the first 3 devices in our portfolio, all which make life-saving procedures less invasive. Our portfolio of devices will drive value by increasing access, because in certain cases, there are only a few physicians that can or are willing to perform these procedures due to a lack of usable tools. We will also move procedures toward less invasive approaches, which will reduce hospital costs and length of stay, and we will decrease costly morbidity and mortality. The total addressable ductal stenting market is estimated at 1,800 patients per year in the US. These life-saving procedures are typically reimbursed via DRG with high payment rates. And because of already well-established manufacturing procedures, we can expect high gross margins of 85% or more, and a conservative $10 million per year revenue for this device alone. When we add the other 2 devices in the portfolio, we can grow our revenue to over $50 million per year, ensuring long-term viability.
We will pursue regulatory approval for the Lifeline stent using the expedited HDE pathway and are planning for our first Q-sub to confirm our clinical trial strategy before the end of this year. Because of the very concentrated market, we can build a small commercialization team to target the top 25 hospitals that perform a majority of these cases.
We're currently raising a $10 million Series A financing that will get us through the launch of the Lifeline stent, as well as through a number of important milestones for our other 2 beachhead projects. Our goal is to match our Series A raise with additional non-dilutive funding through grants in order to maximize value for our investors. In summary, we are on our way to a launch of the first stent designed specifically for the ductus arteriosus in 2023. We have started to build a portfolio of devices to ensure long-term viability, and we have put together a talented and motivated team to carry out this mission. We hope you will support our efforts in helping to heal little hearts. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. We're now open for questions from the judges. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you for the presentation, Bev. How far is that Series A going to take you? I'm taking a look at the cost of the A versus the revenue per year. They're pretty equivalent at the moment. I know you have other devices in the pipeline, but where will you get with the $10 million A that you hope to raise?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. So our $10 million Series A will get us through the launch of the first product, the Lifeline stent, and through commercialization with some commercial traction there. We'll also get through major milestones of our second and third products so that we can follow on this launch with additional launches. The idea here is obviously that we can match the Series A financing with non-dilutive funding through the SBIR grant funding and other non-dilutive mechanisms, so that we maximize value for our investors, and that this could be the only raise we may need to get to cash flow positive.
Thank you.
Very nice presentation, Bev and Mark, and good to see you, Mark, again. It's been a while. Tell me a little bit about what you're going to have to do for the HDE and what you've met with FDA, I expect, and you've gone through a pre-sub to talk about the study that you're going to have to do. Tell me a little bit about what's been discussed so far.
Yeah, so actually, just to clarify, we have yet to go through a pre-sub. So our goal is to actually do our first pre-sub by the end of this year.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that's certainly something you want to do as quick as you can, simply because there's a lot of things that need to be done. And I'd encourage you that the sooner you do that, you're not wasting time and money, because there is going to be.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Nice presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your support.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, and I'm looking, let's move on, and we'll move to our final presentation.
Team 11, Novo Nate. You are ready, please share the screen.
So hello, everyone. Thanks for making it through the last presentation. My name is Eric Shahab. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Novinate. And I want to start by telling you a little bit more about what you've already heard about, which are umbilical cord catheters, which are really lifelines for neonates in intensive care. They're really the first and most reliable way to administer life-saving nutrients and medication in a critically ill newborn. And about 300,000 umbilical catheters are placed every year in the US, and then many more globally. And there's this huge disparity in the way that umbilical or central lines are secured between adults and neonates. In adults, you have this simple and elegant, sterile, occlusive dressing to be used that keeps the line protected and secure. And this is really today's standard of care in 2021 still for securing umbilical cord catheters in the NICU, leaving the stump completely exposed and using nothing more than off-the-shelf adhesives in a non-standardized and ineffective fashion. And umbilical cord catheters are therefore like one of the only unprotected central lines in the whole hospital. This maps to a wide range of clinical and financial risks for NICUs. Up to 68% of umbilical venous catheters will actually migrate within the first 24 hours. And this leads to a wide range of complications that can cost hospitals hundreds to tens of thousands of dollars per patient when one of these complications occur that have been directly associated with umbilical catheter malposition, not to mention prolonged length of stay. And all of these have been studied directly with umbilical catheters. Some have not yet been analyzed in terms of their economic consequence. But this amounts to over $300 million that are lost every year due to complications associated with umbilical catheter malpositions, amounting to about $1,300 that is lost per NICU patient with at least one umbilical catheter. So suffice to say, NICUs are incentivized to invest in technologies that improve outcomes around these umbilical catheters and save them money because reimbursement is typically bundled. A lot of these events are reportable and not reimbursed by payers. So we designed LifeBubble. It's a really simple, sterile silicone device that's nice and soft that protects the umbilical stump catheter interface and secures the catheter mechanically by having a catheter wrapped around a securement knob and pulling an elastic strap over the top of that knob to mechanically secure it. It can secure up to 2 umbilical catheters. It's FDA registered and now on the market, and it lowers the risk of umbilical catheter malposition, as shown by a couple recent clinical studies. And just to go over a few more of the value propositions, in addition to lowering the risk of catheter malposition, it protects the umbilical stump catheter interface from caregivers and parents who are encouraged to hold their baby. This is really done now for the first time. It allows each catheter to be independently secured so that if you need to reposition or remove one catheter, you can do so without perturbing the second. It comes in a sterile packaging, really to ensure the cleanest environment upon securement. And it standardizes the process of catheter securement while maintaining the current NICU workflow. There are a few other commercial products on the market for umbilical catheter securement, but they were really designed to save a little bit of time and not actually improve clinical outcomes at all. And as a result, have not been adopted, and off-the-shelf adhesives are still the gold standard. So LifeBubble's regulatory classification is a Class 1 510(k) exempt device. We're an FDA registered company as of 2019. We have a quality system that we're pretty proud of that's ISO 13485 compliant. We're actually expecting our certificate in the coming weeks for ISO 13485. And we have a robust IP protection with 3 different patent families. The initial set was generated at Stanford, and then a couple other patent families directly owned by the company. The one at Stanford we have licensed, of course, that give us some pretty great protection here. And we're now on the path to commercialization. In the last couple of years, we launched LifeBubble, and the plan and goals were to trial it, start learning how to train nurses and other providers, and gain some level of initial traction. Over 500 LifeBubble kits have now been used in 4 different states in the US. And we launched 2 accessory products in direct feedback from NICU nurses that were not launched initially. So we developed an adhesive pack to simplify the mode of access and further standardize the procedure, and a little device called LifeBubble Buddy that allows nurses to gain hands-free access of the insertion site through this optional tool that has been really well received to date. We also supported 2 independent clinical studies at academic institutions on catheter securement with LifeBubble, who showed about a 70% reduction in umbilical catheter malposition rates when their lines were being secured with LifeBubble. And this is compared to the previously reported rates in literature. 2 NICUs have now approved LifeBubble. We have 1 trial ongoing and 4 on deck. And we've started to validate our pricing at $99 ASP per LifeBubble kit plus $33.50 for the combination of the accessory products. Which, like I said, has been started to become validated at these converted sites. And our plan for 2021 is to ramp up our commercialization efforts by partnering with NICU-focused distributors, expanding our clinical support staff of NICU nurses, hiring a single national sales manager, and finally access our US market. And this is the goal for a 2 million Series A plan for later this year. This is our awesome team that I'm proudly representing, and happy to tell you any more through questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We can take questions from the judges.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Great to see you, Eric. I remember seeing this in ideation stage. Super fun to see the real thing and see it out there. I'm curious, so it makes sense that right now you're looking really gaining traction. What are your thoughts beyond that? Is it building out more products? Is it trying to find a strategic acquisition? Where do you think this will ultimately fit, in the next few years?
Yeah, awesome. So a little bit of all of the above. So we've been continuously in the last couple of years talking to various strategics to see what level of partnership might make sense to accelerate our access to the market, for sure. We do have a plan to launch a pipeline of products. As we have begun this effort, we have recognized how woefully underserved the NICU market is in general. Sorry, I'm looking away because I have another slide that I'm trying to pull up. So we have launched these 3 products to begin with now, and we have a smaller life bubble size that we're currently developing. We did recently receive an SBIR grant for a new product to secure endotracheal tubes in the NICU, which have similar call points and similar value propositions to life bubble, so it fits right in our wheelhouse. And we're also working on just developing a multi-purpose NICU specific adhesive that we have some, I think, really innovative ideas on how to develop that addresses a big need. And anyone who's worked in a NICU will tell you how difficult it is to stick something to a baby in an incubator with unformed skin. So definitely expanding our portfolio of products, most intently focusing on these that you see here. And then, continuing to explore relationships with distributors to kind of accelerate all these efforts. And strategics as well. So potential acquisitions are certainly on the table too.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, Eric, nicely designed product. I think you've got an opportunity here that I'd love to see it explored more. What do you see as the big challenges over the next 2 years, probably 21 and 22, as you start to enter the market in a more robust way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, market access is unquestionably our biggest challenge right now. I think we have a pretty good plan on how to address that through this this strategy of NICU-focused distributors. I'm aware through conversations with a lot of colleagues and other other people in this space, all the challenges associated with working with distributors. So I think finding a way to manage those challenges will be one of the primary goals on the commercialization perspective. We're trying to mitigate that a little bit by hiring a single national sales manager who can also double as a direct sales rep, and then this clinical support staff that will be hired directly by us to kind of support these distributors and support initial kind of trials and adoption in new units. But I mean, as for any company entering the initial commercial phase, the actual commercialization and the goal of getting a cash flow positive in the next couple of years will unquestionably be the primary challenge.
Sure. What about iterations to the product? Do you see that happening as well?
Yeah, so we are pretty proud about how much feedback we have gotten from nurses and really listening to their feedback, which has led to the development of these accessory products. As I briefly mentioned, we have a smaller life bubble size that we are developing and actually intending to kind of place an order for a mold in the next couple of weeks. And that will serve effectively as kind of a line extension, if you will, but in many sense, an iteration as well. And then obviously listening to feedback, and we do have already some sense of a second larger version that would replace the current life bubble and some of the additional features that it might kind of be encompassed in that version.
Thank you.
George, you're next.
Thank you. I agree with Michael greatly. Very, very well designed product and a great need for anybody who's tried to sew one of these lines in place and seen how primitive it is. It's a great advancement.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, the gold medal here would be to actually reduce central line infections. Are you collecting that data, and where are you with that? How do you see that rolling out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be frank, when we sort of started this endeavor back when we were a Stanford-based team, it was around the intent of reducing infections and infection risk, which is still absolutely the goal, which is why protecting that insertion site is still vitally important. We realized, though, pretty quickly that while the infection rates are dramatic and cost up to $90,000 more to treat, a lot of it absorbed by hospitals, the rate of infection is relatively low, right? It's in the low single-digit percentages. And to conduct and support a clinical study that shows a statistically significant reduction in that low single-digit percentage would be honestly cost prohibitive for a company of our size and kind of our market opportunity as well. So we have kind of focused on catheter malposition rate reduction as the primary outcome and value proposition, and really just use kind of the logic around protecting the insertion site from bacteria as kind of this surrogate claim for infection reduction. But we're not actively collecting data on infection reduction. I suppose it is worth briefly mentioning that these clinical studies that we've conducted, of the sort of 72 patients across the 2 studies, there were no infections or other umbilical related complications that were reported in these studies.
Thank you.
Perhaps an extension of the last question, but you stated that you had 500 customers, and I'm wondering what's the learning been from having that customer base?
Sorry, so 500 patients. So we have really 2 paying customers right now and are supporting about 4 trials, or have 4 trials on deck and 1 active trial. But the product has been used sort of in a commercial setting on over 500 babies.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, continue to learn a lot. Yeah. I'll say one thing, just kind of extension of that. One thing that has come up that we didn't really expect when we initially launched the product is that the nurses are feeling a little bit more comfortable letting the parents hold their babies with the line being protected and secured a little bit better. As any bedside nurse or neonatologist will tell you, family holding is really important and associated with better neurodevelopmental outcomes. Nurses and physicians are oftentimes hesitant allowing parents to hold babies with central lines in place, especially umbilical lines. Some hospitals even have an explicit policy, no family holding with an umbilical cord catheter. And we have anecdotally seen rates of kind of family holding increasing with life bubble, and at the very least, nurses telling us that they're more comfortable allowing families to do so. And in one case, a parent actually thanked us, which was really a heartwarming moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the last team, and thanks to everybody who participated, all the teams and the judges. We will be announcing decisions later today, and we will be letting you know who's winning. So let me now introduce that we'll have a break until and for the next 7 minutes, 10:30 Pacific time. And also, we should recognize that today is Cesar Chavez Day, and we are certainly commemorating all the work is done for justice and workers around. Thank you, and back to Usha.
Thank you, Shuvo. And thank you everyone for joining the speech competition. Exciting innovations and great presentation. Thank you, judges. Thank you all. As Shuvo said, we will take a short break and come back and join us for more exciting sessions, keynote and roundtable discussions. See you soon.
Hi, Usha. It is great to see pictures of all my old friends. And this is a very special keynote address by Vasum Peiris, who is the Chief Medical Officer and Director of Pediatrics and Special Populations at our old friend, the FDA. So Vasum has been a wonderful partner for us, and we've been fortunate to work with him for the last couple of years on the Pediatric Device Consortium format. But I'll just mention that in addition to his many responsibilities at the FDA, he's also forged some brand new things. And one of them I hope he'll tell us about is the Pediatric Device Forum, which is a quarterly meeting like this. It's very much like this, with new topics coming out each time. So keep an eye out for that. Vasum, I've loved working with you. Welcome aboard. Take it away.
And Mike, should I go ahead and start it off, or
yeah.
Apologies for missing the introduction.
Vasum, I already told him about you, and I also told him about your criminal background.
That's important. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression that we're just trying to do good work here. Well, thank you very much, Mike, and I appreciate the introduction, despite not having been able to hear it. What I want to talk to you all about today is really developing a national innovation ecosystem for pediatric device development. And I'll try to go through the slides somewhat quickly, just so that we have a little bit of time at the end. But the key point that I wanted to really get across here is that this is really about leading together, especially when we are trying to address a very long-standing generational issue, right? And that issue is the fact that pediatric medical device development for children really is not optimal, and there is definitely potential for improvement. And what we want to do is be able to take those strategic steps forward. So let me give you a quick presentation outline. What I want to start out with is just an aspirational point about where we are and where we'd like to go. I'll give you a little bit of insight around what a child's experience of innovation is, right? Because that's different from what an adult's experience is. Take a closer look at a decade of innovation here at CDRH, at the Center for Device and Radiological Health at the FDA. Talk a bit about the strategic path forward in terms of creating a program for pediatric technology and device innovation at CDRH. But what I'll really focus my time on is developing the ecosystem, and what we've titled ShipMD. That's a system of hospitals for innovation in pediatrics and medical devices. So let me kick it off here. Currently, as I mentioned, children experience medical device innovation in a very different way than others do. And together, I believe we can begin to shift those perceptions and lead the change that's necessary. But again, it needs to be together with all aspects of our health system contributing and leveraging their expertise. And we can create an ecosystem where technology innovation truly works for everyone. And when I say everyone, that includes children, because certainly at the moment, it doesn't work as well for children. So I mentioned a different experience of innovation for children. So let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. So for those of you who aren't pediatric electrophysiologists or aren't pediatric cardiologists like I am in pediatric and adult congenital cardiology, this currently is a basic image of what a child or an infant with complete congenital heart block might experience. A can that's nearly the size of their entire abdomen, wires that obviously will not grow sufficiently throughout their lifetime, that will likely have to remain in the child for quite a bit of time. And you can imagine this certainly is not the level of impact of a pacing system on adults that with the current technology that we have. So what is our current technology? Is the technology the limiting factor, or are there other issues that are the limiting factor? Very simply put, technology certainly is not the limiting factor. Just a couple of years ago, we approved at the FDA the world's smallest pacing system. And let me be clear that this is in no way intended as either an endorsement or anything derogatory about the company or the device in any way. This is just an example of the system and how the system works. But when this device was just approved a couple of years ago, relatively revolutionary technology, with a pacing system that's the size of a nickel, with a few difficulties with respect to the introductory catheter for pediatrics, well, it was not labeled for pediatrics. And there was no testing done for pediatrics. It wasn't designed for pediatrics. And despite that, it was basically used within weeks to months in quote unquote, in an off-label manner by physicians that felt that it would make a difference for their patients. And the point there is that when technology like this is developed for adults, approved and labeled for adults, designed for adults, children experience that innovation in the sense of not being innovated for, but being innovated on. And that's what we want to begin to change, because certainly there is significant potential with respect to the current availability of technologies, nanotech, microfluidics, biomaterials with extracellular matrices. All of those can begin to overcome some of the traditional, historically thought of barriers with respect to pediatric medical device development. So let's take a closer look at a decade of innovation at CDRH. And this really helps us to clarify why we need to begin to be more innovative and innovate for children. So over the past nearly 11 years, we've seen a generally increasing number year to year with respect to the number of novel devices that have been developed and approved at CDRH. And this graph is specifically along the PMAs and HDEs, right? The high risk and high benefit devices, those class 3 devices that really can make a significant difference in any patient's life, especially a child's life. And what we see is, despite a year-to-year increase, the percentage of those devices that are basically labeled for pediatrics is relatively stagnant. When we talk about all pediatrics, which at CDRH is actually 0, so day of life 1, all the way to the day before your 22nd birthday, that entire spectrum is pediatrics. But when we actually look at the spectrum that most pediatric experts might say is more reflective of pediatrics, the younger age groups, less than 18, we see about 10% of these PMAs and HDEs from CDRH being labeled for pediatrics, and only about 4% for the neonate and toddler age range. And that age range, especially the neonates, are the ones that certainly have the highest risk of morbidity and mortality from congenital diseases. So that's basically where we are with respect to all PMAs and HDEs at CDRH. Now let's take a look at the one program that we have at the FDA, which is the HDE program, Humanitarian Device Exemption Program. And this is the one program that is actually designed to help innovation and innovators in the device space for small populations, and those populations that are less than 8,000. So what you see in this graph is the fact that at the very top, you see the number of HUDs that have been received by our Office of Orphan Products Development for an HUD designation. That's a humanitarian use device designation. Next line is the number of those HUD applications that were actually approved. The next line down is the number of HDEs, meaning after you've been designated as an HUD by OOPD, you can then come to CDRH, our Center for Device and Radiological Health, to file for a marketing application and review. And that HDE numbers have been relatively stable as well. The next line down is the number of HDEs approved over these 11 years. And then the next line down, all the way at the bottom, is the number of HDEs that have a pediatric indication, which means pediatric or adult. But really, over the last 11 years, we've only had 6 that are pediatric specific. And when I say it's pediatric specific or solely pediatrics, that means those devices are specifically designed, evaluated, approved solely for pediatric use. And that certainly isn't optimal with respect to the level of innovation that's going on. And then when we look at very well-meaning pieces of legislation that were intended to help optimize use of this program in terms of pediatric device development and small populations device development, we see that despite these pieces of legislation, there's been no significant change with respect to the numbers over this, again, 11-year period. And we are seeing a slight uptick potentially in the designated HUDs, and hopefully that will lead to some additional increases in the number of HDEs approved, but we'll see. But very simply put, these systems currently aren't working optimally for children. And I believe together we can begin to build on successes for a lot of these technologies and start to create a pathway forward that can really make a difference for pediatric device innovation. So over the last few years, when I was asked to take this position, what I've been working on is really establishing some of the groundwork and the infrastructure, the foundation, if you want to say, for a program in pediatrics and special populations here at our Center for Device and Radiological Health. And the intent of that program really is to translate knowledge that serves not only the center, but the agency as a whole, and most importantly, the entire ecosystem, so that, again, we can begin to integrate these areas and leverage the benefits of various aspects of our health system, including the agency and the center, to be able to begin to develop more effectively for children. The 3 areas that I've focused on with respect to strategic priorities are really, again, optimizing CDRH infrastructure, improving agency coordination for pediatric device issues across the FDA, and most importantly, what I'll focus on here is expanding the ecosystem. And that's what I'd like to kind of spend the rest of my time on here today. So this journey, I'll say, started out with a public meeting, and some of you may have been able to attend that public meeting back in 2018 in August. And the 3 areas that we took a look at that public meeting really are around optimizing evidence generation. That's a normal. That's what we usually do with at the FDA, where we talk about evidence generation. We talk about methods that we've developed and tools that we've developed to help innovators and innovation in that space. What we don't usually talk about is, what's the regulatory benefits? Are there legislative maneuvers that can help? But we did discuss that in terms of creating regulatory value and simplicity. And we certainly don't, and you usually don't hear about us discussing issues around economics and supportive marketplaces. Well, the reason I wanted to bring those areas into this conversation is because it's fundamental that this all has to integrate together to truly make a difference, again, in this long-standing issue of a dearth of medical devices specifically designed, developed, and approved for children. So about 76% of the attendees and the participants in that meeting noted that some aspect of return on investment was why they were unwilling or unable to enter the pediatric device market, sustain the pediatric device market, and innovate in the pediatric device market. And as we all know, there are many aspects to what influences ROI, regulatory issues, reimbursement issues, market size issues. All of those really make a significant difference here. And what I wanted to do following this meeting is really take the information that we received. We verified this. There wasn't anything absolutely new, but we did bring together stakeholders from across this ecosystem that usually were siloed to really focus in on these topics, and wanted to create a strategic framework that began to try to address this in a more integrated and comprehensive way. And this is where ShipMD comes into play. And so ShipMD is the national innovation ecosystem for pediatric medical devices. And this is the strategic framework that we've been working on with a multi-stakeholder group over the past year or so. It really is a deliberative framework, but the mission of ShipMD is really to increase and accelerate safe and effective device technologies for all Americans. But the focus is going to be on safe innovation for children. And what we want to ensure is that this is something that is developed of, by, and for the ecosystem. So that really makes sense for all the players and the innovators in this space, fundamentally being able to help address this public health need with respect to pediatrics and the pediatric patients and their families. This is intended to be a shared, transparent, public-private sector solution and solution development and risk mitigation process. It really fundamentally is designed to begin to develop an economy of scale, one that truly begins to help improve ROI, promote market access, and then begin to facilitate a dynamic evidence generation and financing infrastructure, again, that makes sense for the innovators, that can fundamentally translate into developing those devices that are needed for pediatric patients, because fundamentally this has to work for the ecosystem. I'll give you a very broad 30,000 foot, probably more of a 100,000 foot overview here of the system, but very simply put, on the front end of this would be a group of experts that would be probably brought together by a qualified group of hospitals. But these experts would be in a number of different areas, in engineering, clinical science, medicine, business, and others. They would, applicants that are interested in engaging the system would be able to apply, and if they qualify and are accepted into the system with respect to the capacity, they would be able to engage the system. On the front end as well, we'd potentially have a more facilitated interactive process with the regulatory agencies, with CDRH, to be able to develop clinical trials that are as efficient as possible and potentially can optimize the benefits from the SHIP ecosystem, especially the fundamental framework or the spine of the system, which is the network of hospitals. We would want to qualify a group of pediatric academic medical centers or other pediatric hospitals that have the breadth and depth of infrastructure, expertise, and experience to be able to create a safe innovation environment for children across the country. And this type of a network would be accessed via a single signature contract. There would be a single IRB. All of those types of steps, just a couple of which I'm mentioning there, will make a difference in terms of reducing the hurdles and mitigating the access issues to being able to develop the evidence that's necessary to go through the regulatory process and fundamentally get to market and thereby help the lives of patients. There are a number of other programs that we are working on, including the potential of a program that would clarify reverse extrapolation, meaning utilizing pediatric data As I mentioned, technology no longer is a limiting factor. We're going to be able to develop in pediatrics, as all of you know, and as all of the great pitch competition companies have demonstrated. But by developing the technology and the data in children, we may be able to reverse extrapolate towards adults and thereby decrease the total population size necessary to potentially get both pediatric and adult labeling for a device when it actually serves both populations. But the fundamental point would be to help develop in pediatrics first and foremost. Let me give you a little bit more of the 3 key roles that we believe SHIP is playing. It will basically facilitate evidence generation and evaluation. You can see the nautical theme carried out here in terms of boarding, sailing, and disembarking, and what that sailing portion after the qualification portion of boarding would include, the clinical evidence generation portion, the potential for post-market and real-world evidence generation as well, and certainly the early assessment and prep to be able to conduct a clinical trial quickly at a number of different centers. And the key point there is, I'll just give you a for instance. If we have a if you have a clinical trial that perhaps says that we need 50 patients, and let's say a high volume pediatric hospital might do about 10 of those patients every year. If you could only access one hospital, that number one is a big challenge for many innovators. But if you are able to get that access, get the contracting, get the relationships developed, then it would probably take about 5 years to get those patients put together. However, let's say that you now have access to the SHIP system, and the SHIP system has already qualified at least 5 of these pediatric centers that do these types of procedures on a regular basis. Now, by accessing SHIP, again, single contracting, single IRB, all of that reduces time, the time and effort to be able to create the contracts. You now do it singularly through the SHIP system. And then if you can access all 5 of these hospitals at once, well, that can significantly reduce the amount of time necessary to get your product to market by reducing the amount of time necessary for the evidence generation. And that really is one of the fundamental benefits here of SHIP. And there are many others. The other roles that SHIP will play are in terms of clinical guidance, commercialization guidance, reimbursement pathway development or clarification, and regulatory support, all of which will factor in through the process. And we're also going to be engaging with a number of stakeholders to make sure that this system is integrated as an integrated whole, works efficiently. And fundamentally, we want to make sure that pediatric populations are being benefited after all of this. Another key element of SHIP is bringing together a number of different incentives that will hopefully make it begin to make sense to enter the market from a traditional business standpoint. Key point here of this slide is to point out that this is not something that the FDA is specifically running, despite the fact that we're the ones that have moved this forward. It will be a separate entity that will innovators can engage with according to the governing principles of SHIP-MD once it's ready and launched. And it doesn't change the standards of evidence generation that the FDA will continue to hold. The system is intended to be able to benefit all stakeholders, or as the vast majority of stakeholders in the system, but the key stakeholder that hopefully we want to ensure benefit towards are pediatric patients, so that they begin to have timely access to the cutting edge devices that can truly make a difference in their healthcare. Quick update here on terms of how things have been going and where we are. As I mentioned to you earlier, we've just recently we've been developing phase 1 with a multi-stakeholder group. As I mentioned earlier, we've recently had a workshop to help vet the concept further and get feedback. This has really been a time of engaging, aligning, and clarifying the information and the strategic framework as a whole. We've met with a number of different stakeholders, senior leadership in a number of different health systems, and specifically also have the American Academy of Pediatrics, AdvaMed, and the Critical Path Institute, along with hospital leaders, as part of our executive committee and coordinating committee in terms of moving this forward. With the movement forward with respect to the workshop itself, what we focused on are 5 key work streams that are intended to be as an integrated whole and work within SHIP. And those work streams are the navigation, finance, hospital, reimbursement, and regulatory work streams. Navigation really, as I mentioned, is kind of taking you through what's the process that a company would work through the SHIP system, what are the qualification standards for admission, and how you accept it. Finance is really looking at creating a sustainable platform that makes SHIP independent, perhaps as a business model of an LLC or a 501c3. The hospital work stream is looking at what qualifies a hospital to be part of the SHIP system, and what are the contracting and process procedures that can help to create efficiencies there. The reimbursement work stream was taking a look at how do we optimize coverage, coding, and payment for pediatric medical devices, both from a public standpoint and a private payer standpoint. And the regulatory work stream was looking at creating a dynamic, collaborative evidence generation process that is much more efficient for devices that really could potentially make a significant difference in the pediatric space, especially if they're able to achieve breakthrough designation. At the workshop that was held on February 9th, 10th, and 11th, we had some great success metrics. And I know it's different for different folks, but one of the very significant positives was that we had representation from the senior leadership of the AAP, AdvaMed, the former board chair of the Children's Hospital Association, and of course our own Jeff Shuren, Dr. Shuren, our CDRH director, all of whom gave opening remarks, reflecting that this is an issue that everybody is behind and should get behind so that we can begin again to take those strategic steps that can help to resolve this long-standing public health issue. We had over 650 registrants, about 250 for each day of the 3-day workshop. All the registrants tended to stay on each session throughout the entire time. Lots of exceptional questions demonstrating great engagement by everyone. And these questions were very, very insightful and very thoughtful. So we had a great audience that was very knowledgeable about the space. And the good thing is that based off of all the questions that we had, there wasn't a topic that we hadn't considered in the EC and the coordinating committee. So that was a positive in terms of understanding whether we've thought about what needs to be thought about to move this forward. And so far, with respect to our post-survey assessment of the stakeholders that joined, about 90% are supporting a go decision to move forward with developing SHIP. Currently, as I mentioned, we were in the pre-consortium phase. We're working on some of the summary reports that will be developed over the next few months, and we'll be providing more updates once those are ready for release. The next stage is really putting together the broad consortium of additional stakeholders that will continue to move this forward if the executive committee and the coordinating committee make a concerted go decision. When we move forward, there's going to be a red line separation between some of what will need to happen as we move forward, which is finally getting SHIP to launch and sale. We're going to need to develop a more integrated approach with respect to how we fund the continuing process for development. And I've provided some very basic numbers here. And then finally, over time, once SHIP is launched, another key firewall will need to be there, but we're hoping also to be able to develop a aggregated capital fund that will hopefully, via a portfolio investment type of model, be able to bring mission-driven funds, family funds, angel funds, and others that may consider lower returns on investment to be able to support some of the perhaps small and moderate-sized companies that may be cash-strapped and need some financing. Fundamentally, if SHIP is able to sail and we're able to move this forward, we can get to a point where children like this that require very cutting-edge technologies actually get the technologies that work for them and are designed for them and will make a difference in their healthcare, so that they have equitable opportunity for the benefits in these technologies, just as so many of us do. And I believe if we can do this, we'll really begin to shift the technology innovation ecosystem towards something that truly works for everyone. So thank you very much. I know I've gone through this quickly. Happy to take some questions if we have time.
Tim, thank you so much. James Wall here from the UCSF Stanford PDC. Great to see you, and we really appreciate your insights as always. That was a great overview. I think we can all say a collective thank you to you for your leadership on behalf of the FDA. You're being a public health servant. I think you see both the risk of what is being developed and having to deal with those risks, but also that there's a huge risk of things that aren't being developed, right? That's a risk to public health if we're not able to deliver health technologies for children. So we appreciate that partnership and vision. We're running a little bit over, so I'm going to go to the one main question that was in the Q&A, and that was an allusion. I'll paraphrase, but they were alluding to the Orphan Drug Act and talking about the huge incentives in place, both from a regulatory and financial perspective for orphan drugs, which has seemed to really stimulate the development in that market. Can you speak to why that doesn't exist in any significant equivalent way on the device side, and if there's any consideration of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question and a very important one. I think one that does come up quite often. This is one of the points that we addressed back in the 2018 public meeting as well, in that section about the right legislation for the right market. And what that means is that legislation that has been developed specifically for the pediatric drug market may not always apply effectively to the pediatric device market. Technology innovation with respect to devices, as I think everybody here is, I'm just preaching to the choir, recognizes technology innovation occurs in a far different way and in an iterative way versus drug development. Sometimes when a drug is developed, we as physicians may use that for an entire generation, if not a few generations of medical practice. When a device is developed, there's going to be newer technology that comes into play that can make a big difference. So incentives like, exclusivity, market exclusivity, that may not apply as well to a pediatric device as it would perhaps to a pediatric drug. So we really need to think about if we're going to use the strategy of developing new legislation to help support pediatric device innovation, we want to make sure that we're developing the incentives and the systems that again work for the innovators so that we can create these devices for children.
Fantastic, we really appreciate it. We're going to move on to a panel with the PDCs and hope you can join us. And if you wouldn't mind, Vasum, just turning off your screen sharing, we're going to switch over to a different presentation. And again, a big collective thanks for your leadership in this area.
Thank you very much, James, appreciate it. Hope that worked.
It did, we got it, thank you. It's my pleasure now to move on to, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. Please let me know if there's any issue. A roundtable discussion with the leadership of the Pediatric Device Consortiums. And we're going to focus a little bit on lessons learned and challenges. So I'm delighted to have Kalale Eskandanian, who's the head of the National Capital Consortium, Chester Coe, who leads the Southwest Pediatric Device Consortium, Robert Levy, who's part of the Pennsylvania Device Consortium, and Juan Espinoza, who runs the West Coast Consortium, and myself, who's representing the UCSF Stanford Consortium. So, as you heard from Vasum, the problem is clear. There is inequity in the development of medical devices for pediatrics. There's many reasons for it, not the least of which is the fixed variable of small market sizes that really is something we can't solve specifically, but we can work around. There's also issues of regulatory risk, et cetera. So the FDA has lobbied, Congress has lobbied by groups like the AAP, has allocated money to the FDA to help develop pediatric devices. The vision of the FDA was nonprofit consortia that would enable and accelerate the development of health technologies for children. The goal is really to develop a pipeline of devices with a real chance of getting to patients. And as I reflected today, it's been about 10 years since I went to my first PDC pitch competition held by the National Consortium in DC. The absolute exponential increase in the quality of the people and the projects that we have seen in the last 10 years is not an accident. It is hugely in part to the leadership of the FDA, the PDC, and the focus that we've put and the resources we've put behind developing devices for children. So I don't want it to be left unsaid that we really do understand and see the improvement in quality and the real chances that these devices can get to the market. So We're going to go around and let each one of the leaders of the PDCs talk about their programs. We have a couple of slides to do that, and then we're going to really dig in on what's been working and what the challenges have been. So for more background, Vasum alluded to the public meeting, great information there on the expansive ideas around the PDC. I would encourage people to take a look at that. But Chester, we'll start with you and maybe give us a sense of, well, we're really, the PDCs being regional, we're meant to leverage a combination of pick an area of focus, build partnerships, and in order to do that, we really had to think about what we had in our areas. So Chester, I'd love to hear how you thought about that, your focus area, your partnerships, and your regional strengths in building the Southwest PDC.
James, thank you very much for inviting us. Southwest PDC is really born out of my move from Children's LA to USC in 2013, and what is built over the past since that time has also been a parallel development of what's called the Third Coast of Innovation, which is the Gulf centered in Houston as well as other areas in the Southwest, and that being Texas and the other surrounding states. So really, when I got here, we were able to find great partners, similar to the ones that we found in LA for CTIF. We found great ones here, and really, these are the members that form the Southwest PDC. So our PDC is anchored by a major children's hospital, like all of us are. Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor College of Medicine, we're the largest children's hospital in the U.S. by number of beds. But we have Rice right across the street, and Texas A&M, it's only 9 minutes away. Very large academic engineering research universities, as well as University of Houston, a great engineering school, as well as a new medical school. We also have Family Innovation Studios, which is I call them a local device development firm. And they a lot of times can be the recipients of the SBIR applications that we partner with. So really, we've found a lot of partners to work with. They've been here a long time, and we were able to align them towards pediatric devices. So that's pretty much how we're set up. We also have some other hubs in the San Antonio, Austin area, Phoenix, and Dallas. Again, trying to foster pediatric device development in those cities as well. And we being the hub where the majority of the funding is, they are also available to participate in funding, so on and so forth. So next slide. I think one of the things that we concentrate on is really, we know that pediatric devices has to incubate longer within academics. We cannot survive in the outside world as much as the adult devices do. So one way is to start new projects by surgeons, work with capstone teams at the local universities like at Rice and Texas A&M. And we have a paper on that. For time interest, please refer to that. Again, partnerships between the medical school, children's hospital, universities, and the local device development firm like FAN. Next slide. And then within academics, grant funding is important. So this paper just came out this year about pediatric devices that have been supported by SBIR and STTR funding. That has been the lifeline for many pediatric devices. It's non-dilutive funding. And it's just because we have to stay within academics a little bit longer. So with that, I'd like to turn over to the next, but I do think the key lesson that we've learned is we must stay within academics longer. It needs to be de-risked farther than adult devices. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chester. We appreciate that. Moving on to Pennsylvania. Bob, do you want to give us the overview?
Right, yes, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to talk. So my name is Bob Levy. I'm a pediatric cardiologist at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I also want to recognize my co-principal investigator, Dr. William Wagner, who's the director of the McGowan Institute for Regenerative Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. We're happy to be part of the PDC Consortium program. We're in our 8th year. And our perspective is that we view ourselves as providing both support in terms of device funding and services and extensive reviews. And these have been provided at this point to more than 220 different pediatric medical device projects. We're organized to do this with a clinical and scientific advisory committee. And this consists of the medical and surgical staff of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, as well as allied faculty at both institutions who have freely volunteered their services with very productive and helpful results, usually with direct meetings with the innovators who want to develop devices. We also provide innovators with access to our oversight committee, who provide written reviews at stages of project assessment. These are all business luminaries. For example, Bob Krosovitz, the CEO of Berlin Heart, is a member of that committee. Another example familiar to the FDA would be Susan Alpert, who was an FDA official and was also the vice president of Medtronic at the time Medtronic developed the transcatheter Melody valve. A new program in this phase of the program is an early pediatric device development program, and we're working with a regional medical device company, Archimedics. We support about 5 projects like this year. This is helping somebody take an idea, getting to a prototype, learning what they have to do to bring it forward. Archimedics provides detailed support, including a final report at the end of this initiation project. And many of these projects have gone on and received higher level support, both from our PDC and from outside investors. And we're also coordinated with the Pennsylvania Pediatric Device Ecosystem, which is very extensive at this time. Our new initiatives going forward in this program year involve, first of all, a patient-matched medical device program that there's FDA documents about this. Our approach is to use the 3D printing core that's based in radiology at CHOP. Ray Z is vice chair of radiology. He's in charge of it. And we're not doing on-site device manufacture. What we are doing is providing exact anatomic information to device companies who can then make devices specifically for patients who have anatomy that doesn't work with something off the shelf. We're also in the final stages of launching what we're calling a stakeholders website. It's being called the Pediatric Medical Devices Launchpad. Juan Espinosa is involved in this, and we want to involve all the PDC PIs in it. We want it to be the go-to place for anybody interested in this field. We're going to keep it up to date. We're featuring innovators. Actually, I saw that Dr. Rob Bartlett from Michigan is on this program today. He's our featured pioneer on the website when we launch it, hopefully in a few weeks. And then I also just wanted to mention the collaborative activities that all the PDC people know about, the Innovators Forum that Dr. Vasum Peiris initiated. We just had the first one this month. CHOP is coordinating the tech support for this. We're also involved with Bob Krosovitz in the Japanese-US harmonization efforts for pediatric devices. And Penn Health Tech is a medical school-wide initiative that is trying to foster new medical devices and digital health on the Penn Medical School campus. And one of our faculty member on the PPDC, Stan Sahalik, is on their board just to help shepherd pediatric devices through this opportunity. So, and that's concludes my remarks. And I also want to express thanks to the FDA for their support.
Wonderful. Kalale, can you give us I think a lot of this is building on commonalities, but what really makes the national PDC unique in terms of your local partnerships and your approach?
Thank you so much, James. Great symposium so far, and I thank you, the organizers, for having me. As you mentioned, all the PDCs have the task basically dictated by the RFP to provide certain services using FDA funds. But each PDC has a special focus and a special color that they add to this consortium program. At Children's National, because of our location, so we're of course in close proximity with the NIH, NIST, FDA, and many government organizations. So we have placed an emphasis on making sure that we leverage all federal funding sources that are available to us so we can augment the services that we provide to device innovators. As an example, our partner University of Maryland College Park is leading one of the CERCs in the country. So that really has helped us learn a lot about regulatory science when it comes to medical devices, but also translate that to our device innovators that come to us for consultation services. I'm showing here on this slide a 7-year report card. Our consortium was established in 2013. And this is what we show as our success. Follow-on funding is a metric that demonstrates that from the help that companies are receiving from us, they're able then on their own to raise additional funding and be successful on their path to commercialization. We have assisted over 160 medical devices in the past 7-8 years, and 12 medical devices cleared either by the FDA or received CE mark of approval. Now, we do not use federal dollars for CE mark, but sometimes it could be the best regulatory strategy for some companies to start in Europe, collect the type of data then would help them in their path to receiving regulatory clearance or approval in the United States. And I also wanted to focus on our Accelerator program, which is a bit unique and could be different from other consortia. We start by sourcing, screening, and scouting companies around this time, actually. So we have released a press release was published this week announcing our competition focused on congenital heart disease with another specific focus on electrophysiology devices for children. So we receive applications, we bring them for a competition, and then we select up to 10 companies that we enroll in our Accelerator program. So these companies have 5-6 months to be in the Accelerator program, which is ran in partnership with MedTech Innovator, which is the largest accelerator, device accelerator in the world. So we partner with MedTech Innovator to put this company through that program. And then in September, October timeframe, those 10 to 12 companies come for the final pitch presentation for a chance to receive a prize. And then from that point on, they're also enrolled in the second phase of the Accelerator program, more working with clinical partners at Children's National.
Fantastic. And I think we've taken a lot of inspiration from you in terms of that tiered approach. I think that we have learned that, you know, not every idea that comes through the PDC is something that can realistically get to the market. So we've kind of taken a tiered approach where we try and, you know, source ideas in our innovators forums that you heard about earlier today. We have these across both sites, UCSF and Stanford. Really, it's an opportunity for anyone from clinician with an unmet need to a company thinking about going to PEDS can come and get feedback from a combination of academics, clinicians, and experts in industry. We then do a coaching program, not dissimilar to the National Consortium, where we really do an intense 6-week period where we try and determine, one, the level of commitment by the innovators, which is critical to success, as well as really get them to be sort of pitch ready and understand the risks that they're going to need to address to move their project forward. We focused a lot on kind of, I think our big focus is early in that coaching to focus on value, which is a real principle of the biodesign process. Understanding that you're creating value early is really necessary to ultimate success. And so we really focus on that component of it, and then ultimately can feed these projects into the pitch competitions. We look at a lot of metrics that are similar, follow-on funding. We're younger in our combined consortium of only 2 years, but we've been successful in follow-on funding and patients treated. Even though the majority of our devices are still preclinical, we've started to see a real impact there. So we're also able to move nimbly, and we're able to really have an effect on a couple of COVID projects last year where innovators were moving quickly but not thinking about children. And by putting our resources to work, we were able to get them to consider children as part of the population they could address. So Juan, I'll leave it, go to you at the end. I think Juan in the West Coast Consortium has really two very unique focuses in terms of digital and equity, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that really unique focus, Juan, and how you've enabled that. And you're muted, Juan, if you could come off mute.
Thanks for the intro, James, and hi, everybody. It's always great to see the entire PDC community together. Yeah, so CTIP, we are the West Coast Consortium for Technology Innovation in Pediatrics. So we span all 3 states on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington. And I think the CTIP has, I think what makes our program unique, following your lead, James, of talking about how, since so much of our infrastructure is shared across all 5 programs, is that we've really developed, we recognized, as all of us have, that in between these allocations of non-dilutive funding, whether it's the SBIR or our own non-dilutive pitch competitions through the direct device funding, is that there are these device and business development needs that companies have that are hard to address because they're not really in a position to raise capital at the stage where they're at. So we've created what we call our indirect support mechanism, which this year we've allocated $300,000 on top of the $250,000 in direct device funding, which basically allows us to help resolve some of these business and device development needs, whether it's grant writing support, road mapping sessions, regulatory advice, putting together reimbursement strategies. So that has been something that we've developed here and that we've cultivated that allows us to support companies in between our direct device funding. As you mentioned, James, we've really focused on our ability to move quickly using this type of funds. So in 2020, we, similar to the Stanford group, we were able to support 4 COVID-focused devices, and then here in 2021 we use that same mechanism with a focus on health equity, something that's been really important to us. Children's Hospital Los Angeles being a safety net institution with the highest percentage of Medicaid patients of any standalone children's hospital in the country, issues of health equity are really important to us. And so this year we launched an initiative to fund projects that really have a focus on health equity and a lens on how on issues in how pediatric health care happens and how we might address those health inequities either through technology or through innovative business models or through innovative research strategies. And what that has led to is our ability to sort of support over 100 companies who are currently actively being supported in our portfolio, distributed across all age groups, again, with a focus on early concept and prototype companies, with our ability to then help them raise about $64 million so far in follow-on funding, including a little over $5 million in SBIR funding that we've been able to support by helping to support grant writing, small grants to get grant writers on board to help our companies get their SBIRs. So as Chester alluded earlier, really amplifying the ability of using other federal grant programs to bring in additional dollars to support early stage pediatric medical devices because the runway is long and the market is smaller.
Thanks, Juan. So we got started about 10 minutes late, so we'll wrap up in about 5 to be fair to the next panel. But I just wanted to go around and get a sense from everyone. I think we have this common goal. I think we've all, now that we've been on the front line, we've been involved with these companies, I think we've learned a lot of lessons, both consciously and subconsciously. But I'd like everyone to kind of give me the quick, what is the top lesson you think you've learned, and maybe a sentence or two, and what is the top challenge we still face as we try and develop things like ShipMD and try and address the ongoing needs of pediatric development. So maybe I'll go in reverse order and Juan, go back to you if that's okay. So really top lesson learned in terms of what works, and then top challenge.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think for me, my top lesson learned is that a big component of this is just it's awareness and education. of both of across sectors. So not just for patients, but for physicians, for developers, and for regulators about what are the true needs in pediatric. When we go to conferences, we go to meetings, there's a huge gap, and people don't even realize that there's a problem with a lack of development and innovation in pediatric medical devices. And so if they don't know it's a problem, then it's not registering on their scale of things we need to address. So there's a component of just advocacy and awareness that is still critical today, despite the number of efforts that have been deployed. And so we try to make that part of every do has an advocacy and awareness component first, just to make sure that this is an issue that is on everyone's radar, which is which is part of the challenge as well, is how do we keep this on people's radar? There's like a fatigue, right, that happens when there are so many issues that you're trying to track that are important, whether it's health equity or reimbursement or healthcare access, and remembering that, oh yeah, there's also this problem in how we develop medical devices, how we approve them, how we move them forward to meet the needs of children. And so just being able to keep that in the forefront of people's minds, whether it's Congress or regulators or innovators or industry, is hard.
Yeah. Kalale, what are your sort of top lessons? You've been at this for a while, and what are the biggest challenges you still see?
Yeah, thank you. As you mentioned, James, I think that, as an ecosystem, as a pediatric device ecosystem, we've come a long way, and I think that the ecosystem is so much more mature and educated in terms of understanding the shortfalls, the lacks, the things that are still lacking in the market. I think that the top lesson learned for me is, at the end of the day, the companies, the medical device innovators need to put their product in the market in use. And clinical validation is a big part of that. So it is on my top agenda to strengthen the clinical trials infrastructure to conduct device trials at Children's National. Now, we understand very well how to do drug studies, but we still have a long way to go to educate our IRB, our scientific committees, to also understand what it takes to do device trials.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point, and I think that's somewhere where collaboration really does gain scale, and it really allows us to more wisely spend money. Bob, what are your thoughts from the Pennsylvania PDC?
Well, I think one of the most important positive things that we learned about relates to sort of taking advantage of our FDA program officials in pre-submission meetings with companies. And those individuals, Erica, Vasum, are very happy to be present at the pre-submission meetings, and that's made a very significant difference. We've had a case, for example, of a digital health device, a really outstanding one that was stuck for years, and it was a big breakthrough, to have that, and it's something we facilitate, and I think is really novel, having this opportunity. I think the big challenge in the future that I would like very much to see addressed has to do with the off-label use of pediatric medical devices or other devices used off-label in pediatrics, especially the class 3 devices. And in cardiology, especially interventional cardiology, it's become so routine that no one questions or thinks about the problem with the lack of labeling and the things that can go wrong, and devices that were really made for adults. A stent that was made for an adult bile duct, for example, really is not the best thing to be using in pediatrics. This, I think, is a tough challenge, and I hope the consortium system will be part of addressing it.
Thanks, Bob. Chester?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'd say, going back to the fact that pediatric devices probably has to incubate within academics a little bit longer and needs to be de-risked farther. I think one thing I would see and recommend is that if you think that you're going to take an adult lessons learned and try to apply to pediatric, we find that doesn't work. If you're concentrating on the size of the market, how to get in front of investors quickly, unfortunately, that doesn't work. And so if you're not familiar with the pediatric device and device development, some of the issues, I think going back to what you and the student talked about in terms of meeting 1.0 back in 2018 and meeting 2.0, which really shipped MD, all the information is archived and available on the web. So I think a lot of your questions can be answered. The whole thing about drugs and devices, it's all there in 2018. Going back to where pediatric devices are, I mean, most of them are going to be small business. I mean, just look at the AdvaMed Pediatric Device Working Group, and 80% of the members are small businesses. So we deal with smaller markets. We can't use the adult lessons. We just have to do things differently. And I think that's what the PDC program and all of our advocates have done nationally to where we are now in a much better place than we were when the program started.
Yeah, I totally agree. Across the board, and I think, Chester, that I'll bring it home with my final comment, which I think builds on your thoughts, is that we have this fixed variable of small market size that we just can't change that. But there are things we can do to make the market more attractive for devices. Early stage funding is one of them. I completely agree with you. The efficient use of capital, particularly non-dilutive capital through universities and grant funding to de-risk projects, is great. We also, on the other side, though, I think we need to have investors who have more of an impact mindset, who are willing to invest in a small business that can make money and can be a reasonably sustainable business, but it's not going to give venture returns. And I am very optimistic that we're seeing more of that mindset. And we're really seeing people focus on this as an impact over returns. And then, finally, I think we as a collective group need to think about reducing the friction. If a great innovation comes out and it delivers clinical impact and improves outcomes, we're a relatively small group of pediatric providers. I think we can do better in making sure that innovation is appropriately adopted, because that commercial mile, that last mile of getting a device from early studies to a full sales force, is a huge amount of money that's just not justified in peds, period. So I think we need to think a little bit differently about that. So unfortunately, those leave a little bit more questions than answers. But
James, can I just one more thing? I mean, also, I think if you find large industry partners or spending time in pediatrics, really cherish them, really encourage them, really want to work with them. I'll give one example. BD Bard in Arizona, their pediatric dialysis catheter unit, they're building new catheters for kids. I mean, that's great. Large industry, spending time in pediatrics, they're focused, philanthropic or mission-based. So I hope there are more of them. We just got to encourage them to spend more time in pediatrics. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we don't have all the solutions, but we're working hard. We appreciate the partnership with the FDA and our other funders. Thank you to all my colleagues in the PDC for sharing your thoughts today. And I'll pass it on to Stefano Renzi, who's going to run a panel on real-world evidence. Stefano?
Hi, James. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be a talking head with you here and the rest of the presenters. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the panel on real-world evidence. As you may have been able to deduce from the name of the panel, we're here to talk about real-world evidence in the space of pediatric medical devices. And hopefully, we're going to be able to give you all some insights about what real-world evidence is, why it's a hot topic, and also give you some ideas about how you might use real-world evidence as part of your regulatory strategy. We have a great panel with us today, and as I introduce them, I would like to ask you all to withhold your applause emojis until I'm done. So I'll start with myself. My name is Stefano Renzi, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I'm a data nerd extraordinaire with appointments at Stanford, where my research focuses on applications of artificial intelligence in drug development, and at UCSF, where I'm the technical lead for real-world evidence at the Pediatric Device Consortium. We have with us Dr. Ben Padilla, who specializes in pediatric general and thoracic surgery. His clinical interests include pediatric surgical oncology, pediatric endocrine surgery, and the correction of chest wall malformations. Dr. Padilla's research focuses on the use of new technologies in pediatric surgery and the surgical management of rare pediatric endocrine conditions. We have with us Jonathan McElwee. who is a senior manager of regulatory affairs at AtriCure. He has been in the medical device industry for over 15 years, including 9 years at AtriCure. His regulatory experience includes new product development, expanded indications, clinical studies, FDA Class 2 and Class 3 submissions, and various global submissions. We also have Dr. Sanket Dhruva, who's an assistant professor of medicine at UCSF School of Medicine and a staff cardiologist at the San Francisco VA. His research focuses on understanding and strengthening the evidence base for the safe and effective use of medical devices. And he has over 100 peer-reviewed publications, including multiple studies using real-world data. We have with us Dr. Erica Torgerson, who's the director of Rare Pediatric Disease Designation Program, the Humanitarian Use Device Designation Program, and the Pediatric Device Consortia at the FDA and the Office of Orphan Products Development, where she promotes the evaluation and development of products, so this is drugs, biologics, devices, or medical foods for rare diseases and conditions. We also have with us, who you may have heard from already today, Dr. Vasum Peiris. Dr. Peiris, as you know, is the Chief Medical Officer and Director for Pediatrics and Special Populations at the Center for Devices in Radiological Health at FDA, where he provides strategic vision and executive, clinical, and scientific leadership for the center and agency. Okay. So the way this panel will work is that I have some questions, and I will address each question to one or more of the panelists who will have the first crack at it, after which anyone can jump in with their 2 cents. I'll try my best to get us through all of the questions so we can take a few from the audience. So the first question will be addressed to Sanket. And the question is, Sanket, what is real-world data, and what are some real-world data sources that can help us understand the safety and effectiveness of a medical device for children?
Thanks, Stefano. First, thanks to the leadership and organizers for having me here this morning for the Harrison Symposium, and really delighted to be a part of this esteemed panel. So real-world data are data from anywhere outside of the traditional research ecosystem. And there are tons of data sources, and they are really underappreciated, but they're increasing in richness every day. And I really mean that. We're talking about electronic health records, registries, data from personal digital devices, patient-reported outcome measures. And all of these really have tremendous potential to help inform us about medical device safety and effectiveness when they're used in children, both devices that have been approved in children and that may have been used without specific pediatric indications at this point in time. Now, things like electronic health records, they may not be traditional sources of data to study medical devices, but in recent years, they've become increasingly available. And we've also been developing methods to leverage these data, again, particularly the electronic health records. We've been able to identify the medical device use, including in pediatric populations, the patient population of interest, covariates of interest, and then track clinical outcomes of interest too. And these data sources can also allow for the embedding of trials within these sources, conducting pragmatic clinical trials. So really, real-world data, think of as a huge area with clear, tremendous potential for medical device evaluations.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to chime in? Okay, I'll take that silence as a no, and we'll move on to the next question. So this one's for Vasum. So Vasum, why is FDA interested in and encouraging the use of real-world data and real-world evidence in regulatory submissions, and for pediatrics in particular?
Can you hear me? I'm assuming that's yes. Yes, perfect, thanks. Again, thanks for the opportunity to speak here on the panel as well, and it's an honor to be with a very esteemed group. There's a lot here, I think, that we want to unpack, but very simply put, your point, since we now understand what real-world evidence is from what was just explained, there's a great deal of regular clinical use of so many medical devices that we haven't been able to fully tap. And I think the entire reason for engaging the real-world data, real-world evidence construct at the agency is really to begin to engage that robust level of data, transform that into regulatory grade evidence that then can be able to optimize the labeling, enhance labeling, and perhaps even lead to iterative product development with respect to the device area. With respect to pediatrics, this becomes a little bit of an interesting issue, because there certainly is the potential to be able to utilize data that has been from devices that have been used in the adult populations and then quote unquote off-label in pediatric populations, utilizing that off-label use that's been going on sometimes for years to be able to capture that data and then be able to construct that data within an appropriately structured scientific evidence generation plan and bring that data to be able to inform a label and enhance that label. There are many challenges and perhaps barriers for why that process isn't undertaken more robustly on a regular basis by many innovators. And that could be a conversation for our entire panel for an hour, but I'll leave that point there. Very simply put, though, we have the potential and the opportunity with real-world data and real-world evidence to be able to have more devices that are on label for pediatrics because there is such use off-label. The other side of that is, though, as I mentioned during my previous talk, and I think where we really want to go as a field, is to begin to collect the data with devices designed, evaluated, labeled, for pediatrics. And by utilizing opportunities with respect to new models like potentially reverse extrapolation, efficiencies developed by programs that like ShipMD that really are comprehensively trying to address this issue, improving reimbursement, decreasing some of the regulatory perceptions of the regulatory process, all of that, by making it more clear, transparent, we can get to a point where, again, the technology that currently exists, we're not talking about a future state, we're talking about utilizing the technology that currently exists to be able to develop the devices that can make a difference for children, and utilizing that information to be able to incentivize innovation in that space, develop in that space, sustain in that space, and begin to truly create an innovation ecosystem that begins to bring products to children in an equitable manner, just like so many other populations have been experiencing for all these years. And I want to go back to something that Juan mentioned earlier as well. Fundamentally, right, we haven't been clear enough, perhaps, that there's an issue here. We don't want to create undue alarm, but we want to create appropriate understanding that there is inequitable opportunity for technology innovation to make a difference in the pediatric space versus other populations. And that's something that we want to begin to address and more robustly address.
Thank you. Thank you for the great answer, Vasum. So we'll move on to the next question now. So this is for Erica. And Erica, what role does the Office of the Commissioner serve regarding the use of real-world evidence by the agency?
Thank you, Stefano, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's always great to be a part of anything that the PDC is putting together, so thank you as well. So just for orientation purposes, I think it's helpful for everyone to understand where the Office of Orphan Products is located and kind of then that role of the Office of the Commissioner. So the Office of Orphan Products Development is, or OPD, is positioned within the Office of the Commissioner, and that's actually located outside of the 3 product centers. So CDRH for devices, CBER for biologics, and CDER for drugs. And our mission is to advance the evaluation and development of promising products for rare diseases. And this also includes specific programs that are designed to facilitate development of products for pediatric patients. So we have the unique opportunity to collaborate with all of the centers to execute our mission. But the Office of the Commissioner does not address specific questions related to real-world evidence to support a specific product. Those questions are most appropriately addressed by the relevant product center. And in this case, I think that audience would most likely be targeting the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. The Office of the Commissioner is dedicated to communicating the value of real-world evidence and advancing the science of real-world data. In fact, commissioners, as well as our principal deputy commissioner, Amy Abernathy, have spoken publicly about the use of real-world evidence many times, and consistent with this commitment, various offices within the Office of the Commissioner oversee and collaborate on multiple real-world evidence projects. As all of you are aware, the Pediatric Device Consortia Grant Program, which is directed by OOPD, is a program that is dedicated to facilitating the development of medical devices for pediatric patients, and included additional funding in the 2018 request for applications was additional funding for real-world evidence projects. And these projects were included in that RFA to broaden and improve opportunities to leverage real-world evidence for regulatory evaluation of medical devices. In addition, the Office of Pediatric Therapeutics, also located within the Office of the Commissioner, supports a portfolio of real-world evidence projects specific to pediatric patients. These projects were aimed to address a variety of questions, including identifying well-designed pediatric real-world evidence studies, assessing product effectiveness that may serve as a model for regulatory purposes or from a regulatory perspective, in addition to cataloging and highlighting the features of health databases that are relevant to pediatrics to aid researchers and regulators in the future. So really, as we learn more from our experience with real-world data, and this experience has been accelerated rapidly through the COVID-19 pandemic, it'll be possible for us to generate over time lessons learned to make the best use of our resources. We have the unique perspective in the Office of the Commissioner to harmonize some of the common experiences across the centers while also appreciating some of the considerations that make each of them unique. So I think really we're out there as the Office of the Commissioner and the Office of Orphan Products trying to really support the use of real-world evidence and really advance that science. Thank you for the question.
And thank you for the great answer. Okay, so moving on, this next question is going to be for Dr. Padilla. So Ben, you recently led an effort here at the PDC that successfully used real-world evidence to get a pediatric indication for a device. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. It's great to see all my friends back at UCSF. So, when we were tasked with the FDA about implementing this real-world evidence demonstration project, I didn't have a huge background in terms of regulatory issues regarding devices. So I thought that this would perhaps be sort of following a particular pathway that has been well described by the FDA. It turns out that it's not. And I think that one way to view this project was really an opportunity for innovation in terms of developing new methods of cultivating and curating real-world evidence. So as you said earlier, I have an interest in the treatment of chest wall malformations in children, and those can be very, very painful. So early on, I was an early adopter of this device for freezing the intercostal nerves that provides really very good postoperative pain control. It's an FDA-approved device, but I was using it off-label in the pediatric population and had performed a small randomized controlled trial demonstrating that it was really quite effective. As this real-world evidence project began to take shape, we thought, well, what if rather than, given the limited number of patients that we see at our institution, or really the relative rarity of this condition, that perhaps we could leverage the medical record for conducting experiments by searching the electronic medical record and looking for patterns or aberrations that might suggest problems with respect to device safety. And so that's indeed what we did. But in order to do that, it really required a lot of buy-in from our industry partner at AtriCure, because we wanted to be true to the NSCC guidelines for the development of real-world evidence, such that what we wanted to do was create an experiment on the electronic medical record. While we had some input from AtriCure with regard to what variables we were looking at, we wanted to be able to conduct those experiments and have them be sort of sound scientific experiments without cherry picking the data, so to speak. So it really did require, I think, a tremendous amount of trust and buy-in from our industry partner. Ultimately, after a fair bit of work. We did manage to secure that 510 expansion for this device down into children as low as 12 years of age, which was hugely important because this is really kind of the largest market share, at least from my perspective, for this device moving forward. So there's, I think, a great deal of incentive both in the academic as well as the government space and our industry partner in terms of working together to move this forward. And I think it was really kind of a new territory for all of us regarding this real world evidence.
Thank you, Ben. So this next question is going to be a bit of a follow-up to that, and I'm going to invite John to also answer here. So what are some key takeaways from your experience on this real-world evidence project?
So, and I'm going to, echo what others have said. So I really appreciate being part of this panel. As others have said, this is hugely useful, and I think this will be really impactful moving forward. So I'm really excited to see FDA being so, putting so much effort to really move on this. So, it was really a unique experience with this because, and I think Dr. Padilla had mentioned this too, there really is not a specific pathway. And so we had to kind of work with FDA, and I think that's the biggest part is talking with FDA early and often, as much as you can. So we had a pre-submission early on where Dr. Peiris was a part of that one. And then we ended up, even during the submission, we also talked with our review team, or the FDA review team, to make sure that we were aligned as we were moving forward with the submission. It's not a typical type of 510K or PMA. It was very unique in that we had the totality of evidence that you sometimes hear, and I know we heard it a lot, especially as we got closer to the clearance, is important to FDA, but it's very unique because there's not a, hey, here's a pre-specified endpoint and we met it. It was, here's a lot of data, here's why this data is impactful, and here's why it shows evidence, and most importantly, here's why this device is safe for use in this patient population. And it's kind of putting all those pieces together, working with the different teams, and I think also getting the FDA reviewers to buy off on it too. I'm sure Dr. Peiris and others had some interesting discussions and at FDA about some of this because this is new for them too. So my biggest suggestion is reach out to FDA. They are definitely willing to kind of work with the industry and academia, obviously, to get this through.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ben, do you have anything that you would like to add?
I would certainly echo Jonathan's remarks that meeting early with the FDA, being open about what your strategy is moving forward, and then just sort of taking a bit of a leap of faith and implementing that strategy. I think the other thing that I would want to speak to is just, I think, really being sympathetic to what your industry partner needs and vice versa. So us as an academic institution trying to sort of move forward, not just device development, but I think in this instance, development of strategies for generating real world evidence. I think it was important for AtriCure to recognize that that was our priority. And it was important for us to recognize that AtriCure's priority was to bring their device to market. And so I think by having that mutual understanding and respecting one another's priorities and objectives, I think that's what ultimately led to a fruitful relationship where I could very easily see if there was discord with regard to either one or both parties' priorities, that it could fracture that sort of relationship.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, it's certainly true that teamwork does make the dream work, in fact. So we'll move on to the next question. And this one is for the entire panel. Do you all have any high-level advice for innovators regarding the use of RWE in a regulatory context?
I'll just say, as an academic, I'll suggest, we're academics and academic health systems and health systems in general. I really want to emphasize the electronic health record data and the data within health systems, which has tremendous potential. We're interested in leveraging these data, again, under all appropriate protections and understanding safety and effectiveness use. So I think it's an underappreciated area, and thinking about real world data. We've heard of some really nice examples right now from Dr. Padilla and from John, but I think that it's an underappreciated area, and look out, think of this as an opportunity, look for partners. People will want to partner with you. There's tremendous opportunity. The methods are being developed. So really thinking a little bit outside of traditional sources, in particular, when medical devices may have been used in pediatric populations, quote unquote, off label. If you know that that's happening, that's a real opportunity.
So Sanket, to follow up on that a little bit, how would one go about approaching an academic group to initiate this type of study?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think obviously it's a small world in the pediatric world, and contacts and such are helpful. NEST, the National Evaluation System for Health Technology Coordinating Center, of which I've been conducting multiple projects with, is another great place where they have, and in particular, PedsNet is one of the 12 or 13 NEST data network partners. So there's tremendous potential to partner with PedsNet, to partner with health systems. But I think that NEST in particular is a great place to start with.
So anybody else on the panel, any advice for the innovators out there who are thinking about using RWE in their regulatory submissions or as part of their regulatory strategy?
Perhaps I can chime in here, Stefano. And I'm basically going to reiterate the great public service message that's already been delivered by Jonathan and Ben and others. The fundamental point of actually coming to the agency and engaging with us early in your development process, I think can't be overstated. Please definitely consider the pre-submission process. If you're unaware of that, take a look at the information that we have online. But as was noted earlier, there isn't some prescribed clear pathway that applies across the board for all things. So we want to be able to engage with you, consider what the overall benefit risk profile is for the device that you're developing. And within that benefit risk profile, we want to figure out what is that, as a term that's already been used, totality of evidence that is available that can help us better understand what clinical endpoints need to be met to be able to recognize what your specific device is intended for, what's its intended use. And to do that, there's a number of variables to consider, but it really is developing that collaborative relationship and collaborative approach with our review teams. And I think engaging through the pre-submission process, getting to know the review teams, helping them to understand your device, know what your strategy is, proposing options and opportunities to deliberate with the review team, that I think is the collaborative method to move forward with.
Thank you for the very, very insightful answer. Is there anybody else on the panel who would like to chime in here? Okay, so there's one question that I'm glad I'm able to get to, and this is addressing some of the limitations of real-world data sources. So we'll start off with Sanket. So Sanket, what is one key gap for using real-world data sources to ascertain safety and effectiveness of medical devices when used in children?
That's a good question. It's probably the lack of integration of the unique device identifier, the UDI, into electronic health data systems, in particular electronic health records and claims data. But that in general, there are opportunities, in particular, we found to overcome those. There are health systems have multiple data. So first of all, there's emphasis. We need to get the UDI better integrated so that we can track medical devices and how they're used and identify the exposure. There's also a lot of great effort at present in using data from within health systems. It might be in the electronic health record, it might be in other places like in supply chain databases, linkage with item masters. But there are, but essentially it's sort of identifying the medical device exposure. And then sometimes Depending on the company, they may also know the specific individual who may have received a medical device of interest. So lots of sort of workarounds, but also an important opportunity is having the UDI in electronic health systems. And I know there is emphasis and work being done in that area.
Would anybody else?
I'll just mention something with this. I think limitation and what we kind of had to work through from an industry perspective when we worked with FDA was, understanding that, I kind of mentioned not having pre-specified endpoints, et cetera, but some of the questions we got included, generalizability of data or heterogeneity of the patient population. And so we had to understand that you're not going to have, hundreds of patients. You're going to have a limited subset, and it was our job, and as well as our partners, including Dr. Padilla, to kind of work through that and kind of justify some of these potential gaps in the data, and see if we could link it with other adult use, et cetera. So it's a unique, it's just very unique especially with pediatrics, where FDA was willing to listen on that, which was, I think, very important. And again, going back to what Dr. Peiris said as well, but from an industry side of things, we tend to be a little scared to talk with FDA, but I think it's important to know that they don't bite, and especially with real world evidence, and very much with pediatrics, they're really looking to really get these devices moving, and they're willing to listen and hear some of these justifications. So definitely reach out and work through some of those risk mitigation pieces that are needed.
Thank you, John. So we're 2 minutes over time, so I'm going to stop it here. Sorry that we weren't able to get to any audience questions. Carolina, I see your question. I will type an answer in the box. So without any further ado, I'd like to thank all of the panel members for a very fun and informative discussion, and also the audience for bearing with us. We're going to have a break now until 12:20, after which we'll be starting the afternoon session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stefan. Bye-bye.